And first, I'll pass the meeting to Dave to let us know some instructions on how to participate and do our roll call. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to all the members of the board and staff and the public for joining us this evening. This is the January 18th regular meeting of the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors. Meeting's been advertised in accordance with the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act as a virtual meeting to be conducted using the Zoom telemeeting platform. Additionally, there's a conference bridge that's been made available for those who cannot participate in the webinar format and access this by calling the township's main line at 814-238-4651 and then entering extension 3799 when prompted. If you're joining the Zoom meeting tonight as a member of the public or as an agent to speak on behalf of an agenda item, I just ask that you please enter if you can use the chat feature beneath the word bubble at the bottom of your screen to type in your name, your municipality of residence, and if applicable, the topic that you wish to speak on so that we can record it for the minutes. Prior to beginning the meeting, just a couple of the general items that I typically go over. First, again, this has been structured as a webinar format, which means that attendees will not be permitted to speak unless acknowledged by the chair and enabled by the host, which is myself. I'll provide instructions on how the public can interact at the appropriate time. And secondly, board members are asked to indicate their names when either making a motion or seconding a motion so that the minutes can accurately reflect any action taken. And lastly, I'll take a roll call of the Board of Supervisors to ensure that all members can hear and interact using the Zoom meeting platform. Please indicate you're here when your name is called. Ms. Nittany?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Mitra?
Here.
Ms. Stevens?
Here.
Ms. Strickland?
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. First, we will go to citizens' input for anything that is not on the agenda. Do we have any citizens that would like to speak to anything not on the agenda?
I do have one attendee with the hand raised. So
Great.
Bring him in.
Great, thanks. Kevin? You're on.
Hello, my name is Kevin Mullen. I own a house in Patton Township and Ferguson Township. My concern is the wastewater utility UAJA. They've been overbilling me 5 years for $2,000. I set up a website for details, statecollegereport.com, and I'd like to meet with either of your UAJA representatives. Your representative, Steve Miller, has refused to meet with me for years, and as has all of the other UAJA board members for the last 6 years. However, your new UAJA representative is Mark Kunkel, and I've never met him, and he's about to start his UAJA membership, and I'd like to meet him in public anytime, anywhere, either in person or with Zoom. I think I can talk to him, and hopefully he can resolve this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Anybody else?
Nope. Somebody else in the attendee list.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to take a motion for the approval of the minutes for the January 4th Board of Supervisors reorganizational and regular meeting.
This is Patty. I move that we approve the January 4th reorganizational and regular meeting minutes.
Rescinded second.
Thank you. Any corrections, questions? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. And next we all have a special report from Dave Probucca, Township Manager, about COVID-19 response here locally.
Thank you, and good evening. I have a few updates to provide to the board and the public this evening, and of course, on any particular item, either of local or regional significance, you can find more information by visiting the Center Region Council of Governments website, Center Region Ready Facebook page, as well as the Township's webpage and the Borough State College website. Township administration offices will remain closed this week to the general public and until further notice. Ideally, depending on the numbers this week, we're going to look to reopen if we can to modified hours beginning the week of the 25th. The drop box is still available. It's checked daily for permit applications, ticket payments, and other correspondence. We remain accessible to the public as needed through virtual meetings and scheduled appointments. And the police lobby remains open to the general public for walk-in traffic Monday through Friday during normal business hours. Public is still encouraged to schedule appointments or have virtual meetings with police staff where possible. Countywide, there have been 10,182 confirmed cases as of this morning, 54,529 negative cases reported on the Pennsylvania COVID dashboard for Center County. There have been 171 deaths attributable to the virus in the county. In Pennsylvania, the total number of confirmed cases as of this morning reached 677,774 with 19,310 deaths. More information on local conditions and response efforts can again be found on the State College Borough and Ferguson Township websites. The most significant developing news on this item is the distribution of the approved COVID-19 vaccines to the general public. Pennsylvania Department of Health has published a webpage which describes the 4 phases of this distribution plan. Currently, the Commonwealth is in phase 1A, which allows long-term care facility residents and healthcare personnel to receive the vaccine. The ensuing phases open up additional categories of workers and demographics who are eligible for vaccinations. The complete list can be found on the Pennsylvania Department of Health website. Unfortunately, many of the questions about the rollout remain unanswered, and I don't have much in the way of additional details on when the Commonwealth will be advancing to the next phase. Furthermore, it's unclear but possible that the eligibility list under Phase 1A will expand to include general public over age 65, as well as other essential workers. More doses of the vaccine are being distributed to the states, and the guidance is likely going to change from 2 doses to 1 dose so that more distribution can be made and more can be inoculated. Still, the general population is likely several months out from getting the vaccine. There is some movement at the federal level toward expanding the government's partnership with retail pharmacies to be able to distribute the vaccine more readily. At the moment, however, it's not clear how much of the vaccine Center County will receive, and Project Warp Speed, which is the federal government's phased rollout of the vaccination plan, only provides 1 week notice to each state of how much they will receive. This does have the unfortunate consequence of exacerbating some of our logistical hurdles, such as proper storage, transportation, and administration of the vaccine. Center County Emergency Management Agency is still working to identify distribution sites of sufficient size to accommodate projected needs. A virtual meeting with Senator Bob Casey and the Pennsylvania Municipal League was held last Friday and provided a few updates, but there is hope that the response effort will become more coordinated in the coming weeks. There's also no indication at this time of when or if additional local aid will be forthcoming in any new federal relief bills, but the senator remains optimistic. I'll conclude my report by thanking all the residents and business owners of Ferguson Township for your patience and understanding. I'll be happy to answer any questions from the board or the public.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions from the board? I'm sorry, Lisa, was that hand up?
No, but then I did think, you read my mind. I just wanted to thank Dave for that really thorough report. I think there's a lot of confusion and questions regarding the vaccine rollout. And while we really don't have that many answers, I think you gave us a lot of good up-to-date information. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Agree. Thanks. Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll move on to our unfinished business. And first up on the agenda is a public hearing on an ordinance of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, amending Chapter 25, trees, by establishing a new part for heritage and significant trees.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Jenna Wargo to introduce the topic, and also joining us tonight is Lance King, the Township Arborist. I brought him on to respond to any questions that the board may have. So, Jenna?
Thank you. We're provided with your agenda as a draft of the Heritage and Significant Tree Ordinance as advertised for public hearing. Planning and Public Works staff with input from Ferguson Township Tree Commission drafted an amendment to Chapter 25 trees to include a new part, heritage and significant trees. The intent of this new part is to recognize the voluntary protection of landmark and important trees, establish a process to nominate these trees, distinguish between heritage and significant trees, and establish maintenance responsibilities for the preserved trees. The Board of Supervisors reviewed this draft ordinance during the December 7th meeting and authorized staff to advertise for a public hearing to amend Chapter 25 trees for this evening. And the staff recommendation is that the Board of Supervisors adopt the ordinance amending Chapter 25 trees by establishing a new Part 4 heritage and significant trees.
Thank you, Jenna. This is a public hearing, so first we'll take any public comment on the ordinance.
And I'll just note if folks that do want to speak, and I see we do have a hand up here, just use the raise hand icon then so that I can acknowledge you. So Madam Chair, we do have one resident I see with a hand up. You want to bring him
Okay,
on?
great.
It's Randy Hudson.
Mr. Hudson.
Randy, you should be live here if you unmute.
Yeah, hi, can you see me? I'm not on the screen, so I
We can hear you.
don't know
Yep.
how it works. Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm Randy Hudson, Nixon Road. I'm representing Nittany Valley Environmental Coalition, NVEC. We just thank you for doing all this. It's great. And there's been great progress with the tree commission over the last couple of months too. I sent you all, or most of you, a letter right at the end of business today with comments. Some of them are repeats, a few of them are new things. We sent comments on the overall tree preservation, and then just a couple suggestions for the actual tree ordinance that's under discussion tonight. Basically, we're suggesting that the definitions of significant tree and heritage tree include trees of ecological value, significant ecological value, and or community value too. And there's a definition in my letter I sent, but I think it's sort of self-explanatory. So really, that's all I need to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. I don't see any other hands up. Dave, do you? Any other public comment out there, Dave? I'll take that as a no. Dave, can you? Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm muted.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
there's no other hands that are raised and nothing that I see in the chat. So I believe that was all. The public
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. To begin our discussion, I'd like to take a motion then from the board.
I'll move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the ordinance amending Chapter 25 trees by establishing a new Part 4 heritage and significant trees.
Thank you. And a second?
This is Lisa, I'll second.
Okay. Thank you. Does the board have any discussion on the ordinance? Steve?
No, we discussed it at the previous
Yep.
meeting prior to the public hearing, and so I'm just moving it as it is.
Great. Okay, hearing no other discussion, I'll say again, thank you very much to the Tree Commission and Dave Modricker and Lance and anybody else that contributed to this ordinance. I'm excited about its enactment. So thank you. With that, we'll ask for a roll call vote on the motion. Dave?
Thank you. This is presented as ordinance number 1062. Ms. Nittany?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Mitra?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Strickland?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Moving on to our next order of unfinished business. Well, another public hearing on an extension of an emergency COVID ordinance of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, requiring the wearing of face coverings and implementing additional regulations to reduce the risk of transmission of the COVID-19 virus.
Thank you. So provided with your agenda is a copy of the ordinance that was sort of re-advertised for public hearing. As is noted in the preamble, this extends the temporary emergency regulations that were established to reduce, back in September, to reduce the transmission of the COVID-19 virus. The ordinance in its current form is set to expire at the end of this month, but this would extend those restrictions through June 30th, 2021, or at the expiration of the emergency declarations of the Center Region Council of Governments or the Pennsylvania Department of Health, whichever comes sooner. So the changes that you'll see reflected from the January 4th discussion are redlined in your agendas, which is essentially just language that allows for restrictions on gathering sizes to fluctuate a little bit depending on state or federal mandates. So if there are restrictions that are in place that are in excess of the limitations on gathering sizes, or that are more restrictive than the limitation of gathering sizes as established in our ordinance, then the more restrictive regulations or limitations would apply. I believe that captured the interests of the board from the January 4th meeting, but I'll be happy to answer any questions. Staff is recommending adoption of the ordinance.
Thank you, Dave. And this is a public hearing, so we'll go to public comment first, please.
I don't see
Not
any
seeing
hands
any hand
raised.
raised? No?
Nope.
Okay. So I'd like to take a motion then from the board.
I'll move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the ordinance extending the effective date of the temporary emergency COVID ordinance through June 30th, 2021, or the expiration of the emergency declarations passed by the Center Region Council of Governments and the Pennsylvania Department of Health, whichever is earlier.
Defendant second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay. Dave, will you roll call us?
I will do that. This is presented as ordinance number 1064. Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Mitra,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Nittany.
Yes. Okay, and our next item of unfinished business is some continued discussion of the stormwater management utility fee ordinance.
Thank you. So, this was a request of the board in concluding the Tuesday, January 12th work session. There was some public comment received toward the end of the work session that the board requested an opportunity to have some discussion on. I know the chair circulated just an email correspondence out to board members asking them to provide any discussion topics that you wish to review this evening. We did receive some. So I'll leave it to the chair's discretion to, how you want to proceed. I know we do have some public in attendance this evening, presumably interested in the topic as well. That's really all that I have to introduce.
Thank you, Dave. Well, that's accurate. We really did want to follow up from our work session meeting. In particular, some of the public comment at the end, I think, was of interest to some board members. I would like to go to public comment first to allow anybody that's attending tonight to comment on, the ordinance, anything from the work session that they would like to make a comment on.
Thank you. So if anybody from the public would like to speak, if you just want to, again, use the raised hand feature or indicate your request by using the chat feature that'll come through to the panelists. We do have a gentleman attendee raise his hand. Mr. Grau, you're on.
Just unmute your.
Unmute.
Yep,
Unmute.
there you go.
Okay, that is basically what I want to talk about right now. Again, it was a nightmare getting on to this meeting. You go back and forth from Zoom to the township. They want to ask passwords. I am on a different email than the one that you have on record. And so it has nothing to do really with the stormwater ordinance. It's really got to be, goes back to that communication thing. So, Dave, you and I talked about it on Saturday, And I'm not blaming you because there seems to be a different format than the one that was on Saturday. You know, that was easier, apparently, that format. But again, for those of us that aren't extremely adept at this internet stuff, I think we're missing some people because you almost missed me on this one. I think the instructions need to be written clearer on the website as to how to get connected to these meetings and how to comment. So that's really how I'm leading off here, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Don't see any other hands in the attendee list and nothing else in the chat. Oh, we do have a gentleman raise his hand, Ron Strauss. Ron, you're on.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, it's Ron Strauss. I'm representing the Pine Grove Mill Cemetery and also the Pine Hall Cemetery. I do notice that in your proposed ordinance, you have a maximum fee for agricultural properties established. And I'm just asking that you include nonprofit cemeteries in that maximum fee. It's section 5, item C. I'd appreciate if you consider adding the nonprofit cemeteries into that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strauss. I'm not seeing any other hands up. Dave?
Nope, nothing in the chat or on the attendee list. That's it.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I guess we'll move on to board discussion. We had a few items that board members emailed to myself, which I passed on to Dave, that we wanted to discuss in following up with the public comment in particular from the work session. So I will just open up the floor to board members to discuss those items. Start there and see if there's anything else. I'd also be happy to get the conversation started on, I think some of us were interested in following up on the idea of introducing I believe, I'm not going to get the language right here, but a revolving analysis of what's needed for the implementation of the program in terms of finances. And, you know, if the money is not spent after a certain period of time, that the fee is reduced in some manner. And so I think that was an item that several folks wanted to talk about. And Dave, I think you have some input on how that actually would work in terms of an ordinance.
Right. Thank you. I'd be happy to provide a little context and some recommendations. So on Tuesday evening, we heard from a resident who suggested that there be some consideration for the accrual of fund balance in what is now designated as Fund 20, our stormwater fund. So this is a separate governmental fund. It's part of while it is part of the proposal or the general, it's germane to the discussion of the stormwater utility fee. It's in our budget this year, as board members are aware, and it is currently being funded through interfund transfers. So we're funding it through transfers from general fund, our capital improvement fund, and our transportation improvement fund. So the request was that there be some, again, consideration for limiting its ability to accrue a balance or a reserve over the number of years. And I think, you know, in looking at that a little bit more carefully, the board could certainly do that. My recommendation would be if there's going to be a fund balance policy, so to speak, that applies to Fund 20 or the Stormwater Fund, that it be done so or set by resolution as a policy of the board, as opposed to something that's established within the ordinance itself. And, you know, what the resident recommended or what was suggested was that there be a mechanism that each year, if the fund balance, or if the fund accrues a certain fund balance that is not used, or that they're within 2 years of its accrual, that it be turned back into a reduction in the stormwater utility fee that's assessed. It's not quite the way that I would propose that it be considered. What I think would be, if the board's interested in capping or limiting what that fund balance is allowed to accrue, my suggestion would be that it be set as a percentage of expenditures, meaning, the board could say, for example, that you want to limit what that fund balance in Fund 20 is allowed to be to no more than, and again, this is just a number off the top of my head, 30% of the proposed expenditures for the fiscal year. And the 30%, while it's seemingly arbitrary, is in line with what Government Finance Officers Association stipulates as a desirable fund balance across all funds. So primarily the general fund, which we well exceed. But if we're talking about its application to this other stormwater fund, if you set it at 30%, no more than, then what it would allow us to do is year to year, look at what we're accruing in that fund, and then anything in excess of that 35% could be credited back into the program, reducing the fee for the upcoming fiscal year. As you distribute it over a number of properties, the properties that are in the township, it's probably not going to be a significant amount, even when we do reach that. But it is something that would maybe help to keep that fee from increasing as the fund accrues a balance. A couple of considerations, I think, for this particular item, and I don't think, personally, or professionally, I don't think it's a bad idea. It's not going to be a fund that accrues a significant fund balance. The way it's structured right now, without doing anything, is there's a minimal reserve that is accrued year to year in what's projected, but it's very minimal and is designed to smooth the assessment of the fee so that you don't need to swing it, that the board doesn't have to have large swings in the amount up or down year to year, so we stabilize that fund. The other advantage to having a reserve is it allows for some changes to the program, either acquisition of equipment or additional revenue or additional funding that may be needed for a capital project or other kind of expenditure, without having to adjust the fee in order to cover the difference. So it's advisable to allow the fund to accrue a balance. That's primarily one of the primary purposes of segregating this into its own governmental fund. But if the board's interested in limiting what that reserve might be, or that maximum fund balance that'd be allowed to accumulate, that may also be, a good idea in order to, prevent big swings in that fee structure from year to year, or prevent the fund from accumulating a significant fund balance. So that's kind of my intro. If the board's interested in talking about what that cap might look like, or that maximum fund balance would be allowed to accrue would look like, I think most likely, just from experience with other funds, this fund in particular is not going to accrue a balance by virtue of just the collection of the fee alone. I think this fund will accrue a balance in the same manner that our other funds accrue significant fund balance, which is throughout the fiscal year, we operate more efficiently, we advance capital projects less than the budgeted amount, and the difference that savings realizes over the course of the year rolls into the upcoming year's accrued fund balance. So, what I mean by that is it's not likely going to be the case that the revenue that this program generates on its own is sufficient to create this exorbitant fund balance. But as we operate throughout the year, it's very possible that we might end up in that position. And a similar or analogous fund, I guess, is the Transportation Improvement Fund, which has a fund balance, and over the years this has changed, and I'm not looking at the numbers directly, but in the millions of dollars. That's for capital improvements and road repair, so those are significantly more than what we see in capital projects, maybe for other applications, so there might be value in having that high fund balance. But that's a fund that the transfers in are set by resolution. It accrues a fund balance as we save money over the year. And, over time, that's added up to as much as $3 million or more that we have in uncommitted reserve in that particular fund alone. So we can talk about what that cap might look like if the board's interested in pursuing it. And then based on the feedback this evening, we can prepare, if necessary, a resolution for consideration the same evening that would set that limitation.
Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
So I think we should take it topic by topic and let's get some board discussion about this as an option, as a resolution to include along with our ordinance consideration.
I guess I'll start. I like the idea of putting some sort of language in there about capping it, because I think it will force us as a board. One of the things that is appealing to me about this stormwater fee thing, as opposed to a tax increase, is the flexibility that we have in looking at it. And I think it's just sort of a mechanism to be sure that we do in fact look at this every year and discuss it.
Thank you, Patty. Steve?
Yeah, I guess I have no concerns about putting some sort of cap on the fund balance. But I guess my thought is that at least for the foreseeable future, it really is not particularly relevant, because I think we're going to have a situation where it's not going to be building up a bunch of funds and then trying to do what to do with them. It's going to be prioritizing the things that we're going to need to do to not exceed the limit we have by the fund. So I think there may be a time that it would go the other way. And I, again, would have no problem with building that into it in case that were to happen. But I don't see this fund as addressing things the same way the transportation fund does, which is you save money for a project that's going to cost $2.5 million in 1 year. We're really not going to be building up the kind of projects of that size. So I really think it's going to be more, we're going to be prioritizing projects to keep from exceeding what we have available, rather than trying to figure out what to do with the excess. But again, I have no objection to building that in case we did hit a situation years out when we find that, hey, we're not spending near what we're taking in. So
Thanks, Steve.
I'll echo what Patty said. I think that's kind of the idea, is you're forced into reevaluating and using those funds and setting that fee appropriately. And then, like Steve said, I think, based on what the board decides for the capital improvement plan, those funds could be used up as they come in. And I think it's important to me that we put this in now, but I think where it would really take effect is in a few years, after, when we're beyond the initial few years that were detailed out in the program plan. So, once we have a lot of these major projects done, so I think it's beneficial to have this in place now.
Thanks, Lisa.
I'm sort of in two minds. So what I have seen in sort of my professional experience is that whenever government or even private companies receiving government funding are told that they have to spend the money by this year, then they spend the money on things that, just because the money has to be spent. And I'm not saying that we will do that, but generally, I'm leaning against requiring that, because what I think is going to happen is that every year, essentially, the Board of Supervisors will be involved along with the administrative team in setting the rate And if there is an excess, I don't see a board essentially trying to not reduce the rates and going sort of for a higher rates and building up this balance. So that's sort of going to naturally happen, I think, and in a sense, returning it back or not taking more money. On the other hand, there won't be this urge to finish it by this year. Otherwise, to get a project done by this year, and in doing so, we might not give our Public Works division the flexibility and that they need. And in a sense, we are telling the future boards that they cannot, we are telling them that they cannot grow the fund balance beyond the point. So for example, if there is a $2.5 million project that needs to be done, then it sort of has to be given. If you have a cap, then we can never save that much. And so it has to be taxed in the year or two where that project is going to be done, and we'll have to do it piecemeal. Well, maybe you can say that we'll say that this is the amount that's needed this year. And so I don't see how it really saves us that much. And in general, I'm in sort of favor of sinking funds and saving money for projects. And I think I would trust the future boards to not put a higher tax rate if they, a higher fee if they have to, and leave it at that. So that's where I'm leaning, but I could go either way.
Thanks, Prasenjit. Prasenjit really posed my question as well, is what happens if we do this and then we do want to save money for a larger project, even if that's not necessarily the norm per se? How would we manage that?
Couple of things, well, three things really. Number one, if you do it by ordinance, if you set your cap on the accrual of a fund balance by ordinance, it'll be much more difficult to change. So, depending on what you set that limitation at, if there was an interest by this board or future boards in modifying that, cap in order to save up for, or whatever, or to accrue money for a future project, that'll be a little bit more difficult to achieve. If you do it by resolution, it's much simpler that way. The advantage to doing it by resolution would be that it gives direction to the staff and to the board and future boards as to what the policy is and what the suggestions were by the group that established it, this body. So, that can be modified by resolution as simply as it was established. The last point that I'd make is if the board is talking about saving up for capital projects or equipment acquisition or whatever it might be, another way that we commonly do that would be through a sinking fund, which is a little bit different than just a uncommitted reserve as you might find in a fund balance. A sinking fund or committed reserve would be something that the board would allocate as an expenditure each year. Maybe if it was $100,000 project over the course of 4 years, you might put $25,000 in the sinking fund, another $25,000 in the sinking fund, and another until you reach that $100,000 mark. And that sinking fund, so to speak, would be accounted for by taking uncommitted reserve or fund balance and shifting that into committed reserve or a sinking fund. So you could still do that regardless of whether you have a policy in place that caps what your sinking fund accrual is permitted to be. The real value, I think, in fund balance is for the unforeseen expenditures, the things that you're not planning for that may come about. So if the interest is solely to, earmark funds or save over time for a specific project or equipment or whatever it may be, then a sinking fund practice may be more valuable to that end if it's to shore up against uncertainty or volatility in the fund or unforeseen expenditures or new mandates or whatever it may be as pertaining to stormwater. Then allowing for some uncommitted reserve will help to smooth that fee structure over time.
So Dave, what you're saying is we can use a sinking fund, we can transfer dollars out of the stormwater fund into a sinking fund if we wanted to save for a specific project?
Yeah, sort of. Transfer is probably the best way to describe it, understandable, but you're not physically transferring dollars in the same way that you would if you were moving money from the general fund into the stormwater fund or the general fund into capital reserve.
Okay.
This is an intra-fund transfer. It's internal to the stormwater fund, but you're taking, uncommitted reserve fund balance
Gotcha.
and committing it for a specific purpose. We actually, at earlier discussions, we had, I believe, at least one, maybe two sinking funds that were called out as part of the program. They were both removed by subsequent board discussion. One was for equipment, either new equipment acquisition or replacement. I don't know. I'm looking for some kind of nod from Dave, but I know we at least had one, but that was removed.
Equipment.
The discussion is the board moved away from equipment acquisition and decided that they wanted to make it a little more lean.
Yeah, we had sinking funds set up for equipment and for building purchases.
Thanks, Steve.
I guess, given what Dave just said, I do think I would favor something like a 30% cap on the fund balance, because that would give a trigger for a review of it, basically, if we find that we're exceeding that. And since we could establish, at the time that a sinking fund became necessary because we're seeing something out on the horizon that would be big, that could pull that out of that fund balance without rethinking. But I do think that it would give a trigger for a board to consider, are we charging the right fee, or are we, collecting more money than we need? So
I agree with that.
And I do think a resolution would be the way to go, and that would be that would leave future boards flexibility, but it would also create the trigger to look at it. So
Yeah, I agree with that. So it seems like we have consensus here. It seems like some of the feedback Dave gave us has hit some of Prosenjic's concerns, which I also shared. So I believe that we have consensus here to move forward with, what do we call it, a cap via resolution.
I'll prepare one for consideration then on February 16th, which will immediately follow the consideration of the ordinance. So if the ordinance is defeated, then there'll be no need to consider the resolution. And then alternatively, if it is passed. And I would say, Mr. Mitra raises a good point. There is a lot of precedent particularly in government for, the use it or lose it kind of budget mentality. I think we have a culture here, though, fortunately, this is after decades of work, frankly, that I think our staff understands that's not how we typically operate, but it's hard to predict what the future will hold and what future boards will what their budgeting philosophies will look like. So the advantage of having this, and I agree with everything that's been said here, and by setting it at something like 30% or whatever is a higher amount that allows for the accrual of fund balance, hopefully will go to further alleviate your concerns there, Mr. Mitra. But I get what you're saying, and it's a good point.
Yep. Thank you, Dave. Okay, next topic that we wanted to follow up on, to consider adding language that details the method for calculating the fee amount in section 5.
I didn't really have, Dave and I were talking with Ron Seibert, our township engineer, and Elizabeth Treadway Wood, our consultant earlier. And I guess we're open to suggestions. I'm not entirely sure if there's specific language that the board wants to offer, we can incorporate it. The way the ordinance is written now has to be modified to reflect the discussion that took place on Tuesday, which was a movement from the 1,000 square foot of impervious billing unit methodology back to the equivalent residential unit or ERU methodology. So we'll update that. If it's just simply, kind of a reference that the ERU or the fee is calculated by multiplying the number of ERUs by the billing units, then, or the rate rather, then we can work that in, no problem. But I don't know if there's something more to the request. So I didn't want to presume.
I think it's what you said there, but I'm not sure. Let's have some board discussion on that, folks that wanted to follow up with that.
I was trying to get back to section 5 and see where exactly we're looking at. But I think what that comment had been about was, yes, about calculating what Dave just said about using the ERU model. And then, but I thought that he was also talking about how the billing rate, the rate per billing unit was calculated. Maybe
So like the median being used for the ERU?
No, I thought that the comment was what the actual fee per billing unit, how that is determined.
I kind of had a similar interpretation of the comments. I think the request was that the board ordain some provisions that say, the rate that's assessed or what the cost is per ERU will be modeled after a certain calculation or something along those lines. And I would really caution against including specific language in an ordinance in terms of how that gets assessed, because it's a fluid number, much like if you think of a similar fee that we assess, which is for fire hydrants. We take the rates that State College Borough Water Authority assesses for water, for hydrant usage, and then that's how we base our fee. So, I mean, it's implied, I imagine, like all of our budgeting is, that we base our fees, with reasonable assumptions of what our proposed expenditures are going to look like. But I have a hard time thinking of how that we would work that language into an ordinance without, inadvertently, committing one way or the other to maybe something that there might be a curveball thrown our way or something unpredictable in the future that we might want to adapt to. So, I mean, I get it. I think I get it conceptually. I just have, and if it's as simple as, the fee per ratepayer will be calculated by multiplying the number of ERUs by the rate assessed per ERU, and then deducting any credits or exemptions that a property owner may qualify for, put that language in the ordinance, that'd be fine. But if it gets into the specifics of how that rate is determined, I think that, to me, raises more concerns than it does address any potential issues.
I think I would be in favor of adding the more simple language that you just described, using the median to calculate the ERU. And I don't know if on the website, in all of the information we have on stormwater, if there is a description of how the billing unit rate was calculated initially. So if we can put something up that does explain how that was initially calculated, I think that might answer what that comment was getting at was, so that in these next 8 years, we have this program plan and the cost of service model, and that was divided up to figure out how much each billing unit would be. So something that addresses what that comment was getting at, because that's how I interpreted the comment. And I think it's fair to ask for that information plainly displayed. I don't think it needs to be in the ordinance.
Great. I agree, Lisa.
So now I'm sort of confused as to how the unit rate is actually set. So yeah, I would like to know that too.
Okay. All right. The next item to follow up with is, are private streets exempt? And how would that work?
Dave to talk about private streets and how they were incorporated into the fee structure.
Yeah, maybe I got the easy question. We'll see.
Maybe.
I think I'll answer it by example. Private streets, such as those that do not have an identified tax ID number, weren't accepted by the township, as you would find Pine Grove, in Pine Grove Mills, or Calder Alley, you know, these types of what we call private streets. They are not included because there was no one in particular to assign them to. I guess if we wanted, in hindsight, maybe we could go back, look at the subdivision plan that created it, and then, you know, assign a certain amount to each parcel. We did not do that. If it is a neighborhood that has like Thoroughbred Crossing, Cobble Creek Manor, you know, HOAs that have an internal network of what we might call roads, private streets, driveways, that take you from a public road to, you know, their common building to each of their driveways. Those do have identifiable tax identifiers, and they are typically of ownership of the association, and those were included in the assessments. So I hope that helps describe what we did by example.
So just to clarify,
Questions?
go ahead. Just to clarify, so like an alley in Pine Grove Mills that people typically drive through, not included. The Toll Brothers little road network in there to get from parking lot to parking lot included.
Correct.
Okay.
So my question is for future developments, how are we going to manage that, in the sense that is it the culture that we will assign tax IDs and so on? And in general, I would like those to be included, except maybe they're, you know, giving an allowance. So essentially, I'm saying that people have to be able to drive to their units. But on the other hand, the community, we don't want to, we would like to at least incentivize them not to pave or to make the paved areas as less as possible. So given these sorts of goals that I have, can you comment about future developments and what can we do or what are we doing?
Yes, so we do promote pervious pavement if it works. So if a future development uses this pavement, it will not be counted as impervious area. Older subdivisions, we're going back 30, 40, 50 years. That's where you find the situations where you had developments, a road was built, either it wasn't turned over to the township or wasn't accepted by the township, it wasn't ordained, and it was kind of left, so to speak, in the name of the developer, who may or may not even have an interest or be, you know, around. And so a lot of those types of roads are just maintained by the, you know, private property owners. We provide services on the road, but we don't, you know, own or maintain those roads. The newer developments all pretty much follow the second model I described, where they either build it with a public road or they'll build it with a private road, but it's in the name of the association in common ownership.
Thanks, Dave. Could I ask about another situation, which would be where there would be a private road that would lead to a house, but it isn't a driveway, So it looks like a road. It has a road name, but it's private. How would that be assessed? Same as the
If it
alleys
is-
in Pine Grove?
The way we would know is we would look at the tax parcel information in GIS, and then we would look to see if in the deed, if that area is included. And if it's included, it would be similar to how we handle a driveway.
Okay,
If it was laid out to be a future public road, but was never dedicated, never accepted, doesn't have a tax parcel ID, and it's just sitting there, then it would not get assessed.
gotcha. Gotcha. Thanks.
Mhm.
Okay.
Madam Chair, we do have a hand up.
Oh,
just
okay.
so you're aware. I don't know if you wanted to acknowledge more public comment or not, but
I think we could, sure.
bring Bill Keogh. Bill, you're on.
Hi, this is Bill Keogh. Not so much a comment, but just one more little nuance that I'm not sure where it goes. Out in the western end of the township, including Pine Grove Mills, we have a lot of abandoned railroad beds. And in some cases, those railroad beds have been sold back to the landowner, and in some cases, they have not. And I'm just wondering, I'm not sure how they show up on the aerial to determine impervious. Excuse me. But just curious, and you don't have to answer this tonight, but I think at least there ought to be some discussion staff-wise as to whether those abandoned railroad beds are or are not included. They tend to be very, very porous. They're not even like a lane, just because of the nature of the way they were built and the way they function. But there are no tracks and there are no beams on them. They're just abandoned at this point. So just something else to think about, Dave, as you look at the aerials.
If you want me to, I can address it now.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, in the one example that you had provided to Dave that I looked at, I did not see that we had calculated any impervious area over a railroad bed. I did not find that. The other thing I would say is that railroads that remain as railroad right-of-way are exempt. So if it was a abandoned railroad right-of-way and now it was in the ownership of the property owner, and it showed up through a GIS analysis as impervious area, you would think we would include it, but I don't see where it's shown up like that yet, Bill.
Okay, I don't see the pictures that you guys are looking at, so I don't really know whether it is or is not showing up. But there was some concern expressed that it may be showing up, at least in some places out here in the western end. It's more obvious in some places than it is in others.
And a general comment too, because I mean, it raises a bigger issue or highlights a bigger issue, which is for residents and property owners that believe that their impervious area was miscalculated, or perhaps that components of their property that are concerned may have been included as impervious, but believe shouldn't be. We continue to address those on a case-by-case basis. It's a pretty easy audit for us to run and just kind of confirm. We've seen some of those issues come up with gravel areas, which we do count as impervious, but property owners maybe feel otherwise or feel should be counted otherwise. Odd things like trampolines or other little appurtenances that may show up on an aerial image as looking as appearing to be impervious. So we can certainly take a look at those on case-by-case basis. So if any property owners are concerned or want to know for sure whether that, in this case, the railroad bed or whatever else it may be, was calculated in their impervious area, please contact us, and if the program is enacted, then we can, make any adjustments that are warranted.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. We'll move on to the last item that was emailed in terms of follow-up, and then we'll open the floor to some general discussion. This item is, are MS4 permit holders subject to lien law?
Right. So I think, and this again was a comment, as the chair just noted, it was forwarded by email, but also, broached at the Tuesday work session. The way I would characterize the question is not necessarily applicable to MS4 permittees, but although they certainly tend to be tax exempt. But I would say, are tax exempt properties subject to municipal lien law? And the answer, quite frankly, is generally no. I mean, I say generally because I can't envision all circumstances, but the lien law is pretty clear that tax exempt or pure public charities cannot be liened through municipal claims or tax liens, et cetera. That doesn't mean that we would not have, as a municipality, other recourse to recuperate fees that either maybe a property owner of a tax exempt property is not paying, or maybe they're not in compliance with another provision of our stormwater ordinance or whatever. So we do have mechanisms, and there is a process by which we can ensure that the tax exempt properties, and in this case MS4 permit holders or whatever it may be, would be held accountable to the fees that they were assessed. And some of that might be, and I do think, though, one of the prudent changes or additions to the ordinance would just be to address that, because the enforcement clause in the ordinance primarily relates to the lien laws. It'd be very simple for me to add in a sentence that says, for tax exempt agencies or agencies that are not, or property rather, that is not subject to municipal lien law, the township can pursue all recourse through the court of competent jurisdiction or whoever has jurisdiction over those disputes in order to, recuperate our assessments. I can work that in. I think that's probably a good suggestion, just so that it's clear in the enforcement provisions of the ordinance how we would address those tax exempt properties.
Yes, I think it should be made clear for sure. If there's another method of enforcement that we know about, it should probably be in there. Others, comments on that? Okay, no comments on that. Dave, if you want to add that for our consideration, that would be great. So I'll just open the floor up to any other board discussion. Anything else that has come up that you'd like to talk about in regard to the stormwater? Okay. Present it.
Yeah, I wanted to find out if the fee is incorporated. So we have talked a lot about fixing the fixing the pipes and lining and so on, and all that is needed. But are there provisions there that can, for using it to essentially design sort of green streets and so on? So in order to not only, fix things, but to build things better so that future costs are low.
Dave, maybe that's a question for you.
Yeah.
I don't think we had that in the first couple of years, Percentage, but in later years, there's, we had some talk about master planning and green infrastructure. And I think we would be looking at that in the future and checking, to see what the board, as to what type of consideration you want that to have in the stormwater program.
Yeah, so then the sort of a quick sort of follow up on that, I think I'll, share my screen and so let's get the message and so on the way. So the Green Street, designs. So this says this is a EPA municipal handbook, I think on stormwater. So it was talking about street trees, but also permeable pavements, bioretention, and swales. And they have some sort of pictures of things that can be done to reduce the stormwater. As I had mentioned previously, Seattle has done some of this, and I think there was some more, there instead of just being paved. They even had, for the trees, I think they even had sort of things to get the tree roots into better soil areas and so on and so forth. So getting to like when we fix things or when we build new things, how difficult is it to sort of at least get something like this instead of just grass and then mowing it and so on and so forth?
Sinjit, I'm very interested in those things. I'm glad you brought the topic up. To the extent that we can build it into capital projects, I would encourage that. We were able to do it with the Public Works building and the land development plan. You'll see that a lot of features that you're describing are built into our site plan here at the building. Another way to move some of these elements forward is through some low impact development type of standards. Whenever a developer goes out and builds a new street, so to speak, for us, not when we do it on our own, they're following our street standards, and our street standards often don't very well accommodate these things. I'd like to see them accommodate it. The closest we've gotten so far was in the TTD, Havershire Boulevard, those types of areas. We built that with a internal swale so that the water, sloped from the road into a green space. We build it with narrower roads. Narrow roads have met with some resistance in our township and neighborhoods. But I think all of these things are things that we should be working toward in whatever mechanism we can, whether it's through our own capital projects, if it's initiatives in the stormwater fee, if it's design standards for low impact development. Some places you see it move forward because of mandates. We're not there. So it'd be, great to see us moving in this direction on our own.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Prasenjit, for bringing that up. It's low impact design and development is something that a couple years ago on this board, we were discussing for a period of time. And I would love to see it come back as a discussion in terms of what we can do, like Dave said, Dave Modricker, in terms of our street design requirements or incentives, as the case may or may not be. Great. Other general discussion points on the stormwater management utility fee ordinance? Lisa?
I just had a few things, and thanks Prasenjit for bringing that up, because I noticed that green infrastructure in the program plan and just we never got around to really going into what that was. So thanks for bringing that up. I have a couple of questions from emails that I've gotten. I just wanted to clear up. So one was, I'm not sure if the parcel fee by parcel charts have been updated on the website. So I just wanted to know if they would be, and a timeline on that with the ERU, I guess, would be.
The ERU.
So the ERU, the spreadsheet that's available on the website, the most recent version, which is what you'll see when you click on that list, the October 19th, dated 10/19/20, does show the ERU methodology in kind of the last columns. So you can see that, but it still reflects both a prorated 6-month version as well as a full year assessment. And it is inclusive of the most recent elements of the program, the agricultural considerations that are incorporated into the document, et cetera. What it doesn't show is it won't go through each individual. It doesn't currently look at each individual ag parcel and limit their fee based on that exemption that was discussed. So we had a meeting today talking through some of the items that we want to pin down before the public hearing on February 1st and have published. So the task in front of the consultant and staff is to have that spreadsheet updated by Friday, by the end of this week. And that'll give the public, a full week to look at the modifications and everything prior to the public hearing being on February 1st. And then, just over 3 weeks for prior to consideration of the enactment. So, I'm confident we'll be able to get some of that. Centrise is also working with the communications coordinator to go through and archive some of the information. We're going to keep it on the website, but we're going to make it clear that it's no longer the latest and greatest version of the documents, so that it's clear to, visitors to the webpage what is the most up-to-date spreadsheet, resources, reference material, et cetera, as per the latest board's discussion. So I hope that we'll be able to have that up on the webpage before the end of the week. In the chance that we don't have it up there, we'll get it up there as soon as we can, so that it'll be ready and visible before the public hearing. But what you do see now does reflect the ERU model, and ERU calculation is accurate, with the exception of the agricultural exemptions aren't demonstrated. But if you're a farm owner and you go to the spreadsheet and you see your fee and you know that your farm is eligible or defined as agricultural under Pennsylvania Clean and Green Law, which is what the board discussed as its definition of ag property, then you can, depending on whether you're inside or outside the growth boundary, if you're outside the growth boundary, which most of our farms are, your agricultural fee would be capped at 2 billing units. So for 2022, that fee would be $75 per ERU times 2, $150. If you have a residence on the farm, that is an additional ERU that's carved out of the ag use. So your total exposure would be 150 plus 75, or $225 per year.
Okay, thank you. And then that brings me to my next question. So something I wasn't clear on, and I did get a question about this after the last meeting, when we were talking about the ag exemption and we were looking at the charts of the ERU and how the billing rate, so the fee per billing unit, would change whether or not there was the ag cap. So it looked like at one point, Elizabeth was saying, yes, the rate or the fee, the actual amount of dollars per billing unit goes up if we have the ag cap in place, and that makes up that difference. But then I also heard that no, that doesn't change whether or not we have the cap on ag lands. The general fund supplements that difference. So I just wanted to clarify that.
The answer, yeah. So the way whether it be a credit or the ag exemption or hardship exemption, the way that revenue loss is supplemented would be through interfund transfers. So that would come out of the general fund as kind of a subsidy, so to speak, for that exemption program and the way it's proposed. And that's what's laid out in the ordinance language itself. So, to a degree, and again, this would be kind of a case by case basis. We would want to look at things like, is there a fund balance that we don't need to transfer as much from the general fund in order to supplement the loss of revenue? But it's difficult to predict at this point because we don't know with certainty how many property owners are going to invoke credits, what our eligibility is for the ag exemption, what the eligibility would be for the hardship exemption. We can run some modeling and have some predictions, but until we have the program in place, if it's enacted, we won't be able to get that pinned down to an exact amount. But I know that it was a little bit confusing to follow even for me to follow the discussion on Tuesday. And I believe what the intent was, or what the consultant was trying to communicate, was that while the billing unit, the way billing units are, the ERU is calculated, or how that figure is derived, may fluctuate depending on how ag properties or other parcels are looked at with respect to the overall program. I think it was mentioned that it would supplement the lost revenue. It shouldn't have been stated that way. It will be done through transfers from the general fund. It won't be made up for, so to speak, by the other ratepayers who will now pay a higher bill per ERU by virtue of having, property owners invoke exemptions or take advantage of credits, et cetera.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. Back to the program plan, something we had talked about a little bit last time was those big capital projects for relining and that kind of thing. Those and all of the different spending items in there will be looked at yearly, either in the capital improvement plan or in the budget. So if we see in the program plan that there are 2 new hires in year 2027, those aren't an automatic. Those would have to be looked at and approved just like any new hire. That's a suggestion of what could happen in that year.
Correct.
Okay. And then finally, I wanted to get back to something we didn't get into at the work session. We had kind of touched on it before, and that's a hardship policy for donation dependent organizations. So for nonprofits, I have some language that I've looked at. I know a couple of us have talked about trying to find some way to reduce the impact on our local nonprofits. So, and that's what I've gotten a lot of communication about between the last work session and today, has been that, and we had somebody speak about that today. So I don't know how the rest of the board feels about it, but I could, email what I've found. There are some things kind of like an ag cap that you cap what a 501c3 or a donation dependent organization has to pay, or you look at their revenue and base it on that. But we had kind of touched on it before. We didn't get into it several meetings ago. So I guess I wanted to see what the rest of the board was feeling about that, if they had heard those kinds of concerns, if we need to figure something out for that.
Other board members, thoughts on Steve?
Well, the thought I had, I'm not sure as far as like an exemption for the nonprofit organizations. I could see that as a parallel to the hardship exemption for based on income, but I think we need to separate that from the discussion of the ag exemption, because our real focus on the ag exemption was the fact that if you look at a map of a farm and you say, yeah, they have a lot of impervious, but they have a whole lot more area absorbing it, that doesn't apply to a church parking lot. So I think, I have no problem with looking at an exemption in terms of saying this is an equivalent of a hardship exemption for a resident with low income or below level. But I think we need to really separate that from the ag exemption, or we start muddying why we did the ag exemption and our real reasons for saying that should exist. So I guess I'm not sure. On one hand, I see a reason to say yes, organizations that are based on contributions, it would really create a hardship for the organization. On the other hand, I have a problem with, if you have a large parking lot, you're contributing a lot of water to the system that needs to be handled. And so I guess my basic comment is, I don't know. Yes and no.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my thinking on those lines is that, yeah, in general, I am not in favor of such an exemption because, then we would sort of have to give Penn State the exemption and a whole bunch of other people the exemption and so on and so forth. If we do such an exemption, it has to be, like Steve said, on a hardship based, in a sense that if we can figure out that the fee will be a significant part of their budget. So all nonprofits are not the same. There are nonprofits which are, have a huge budget, and there are nonprofits which are just, so if we can say that, okay, if this fee is a significant part of their budget and expenditures, then perhaps there is an argument that, yeah, that paying that much from their budget. So let's say if it's the fees come out to be 10% of their annual budget, well, we can say that that's possibly too much. But if it is a small percent, then perhaps it is fine. So if something like that can be done, then for the really tight budget, small nonprofits, I'm willing, I think we should do that. Otherwise, I would go with trying to have the incentive for people not to pay lots of things.
I'll share that one thing I'd seen in this, I'm not sure what ordinance I'd seen that particular hardship policy, and I'll have to find it and share it. It applied to organizations with an annual revenue of below $1 million. So we could, if we were going to consider something like that, that might be something we consider, so it wouldn't affect Penn State, that it's a annual revenue below, certainly not $1 million wouldn't need to apply for here, but set a threshold so that it is appropriately administered.
Thanks. Patty, what do you think? Hardship policy for nonprofit organizations.
I basically agreed with what Prasenjit was saying, so.
Okay.
Hardship, if it truly is a significant portion of their budget, then.
Okay. So it sounds like we have light consensus on the idea of a hardship policy for organizations with some criteria that, say, for example, maybe there's a cap on their annual revenue, maybe, or not a cap on it, but acknowledgement that it wouldn't be for larger organizations. And then also that it would be if the fee were a large percentage of their annual revenue. So it sounded like those criteria were important in considering that. Dave, do you have any comments about this?
I do. Sometimes it's better to keep your mouth shut and be thought of fool than open it and remove all doubt. So forgive me if I'm a little bit, kind of all over the place here. But a couple of things going through my head. I think generally the more, so to be very candid, this consideration of this fee assessment was always presented to the board and to the public as a very clear decision by the elected officials about whether, to whom do you want this assessment to apply? If you did a real estate tax increase or any other kind of tax increase to supplement the predicted, revenue issues that we're facing in the coming years, then you would be saying as a policy decision that you do not want to assess nonprofits and tax exempt agencies, and that would include Penn State University and Ferguson Township and other entities that you may not classify as charitable organizations but qualify as tax exempt. On the other hand, if you elect to move in the direction of a stormwater fee, it is certainly a conscious decision of the board to say, yes, we want this assessment to apply fairly and uniformly across all categories of property owners in the township based on their impact to the need for stormwater management infrastructure. And, that includes nonprofits like the township, Penn State, cemeteries, churches, and the like. So, but that being said, what I don't know the answer to, and what we could presumably do a little bit more research in, because what the ordinance currently presents is some very loose language on an economic hardship policy that just allows the board to adopt by resolution a policy that exempts property owners. It doesn't say residents. It doesn't say residential property owners or a certain class of property owners based on their economic conditions. So if there's a way that the board could legally apply that, the way the policy is written right now in the draft that was presented to you last Tuesday, it applies very specifically to residential property owners. And it even goes as far as saying that tenants or renters do not qualify for that exemption based on their income constraints. So it's very clearly intended, as it's written right now, to apply specifically to property owners that own their units, that don't rent, and that meet certain income restrictions and qualifications. If there's a way that we could expand that to address the nonprofits that are out there and find a way to index that in a way that's fair and legal, then I could do a little bit more research into that, and then that could be incorporated as part of the policy. But truth is, the more the board elects to include or exclude certain classes of property owners or individuals from assessments, the more you're moving in the direction of a general tax increase and away from a fee structure, because the enabling legislation and all of the kind of judicial review that's taken place in the last couple of years has defended the ability for a municipality to enact a fee, provided that it's fair, reasonable, and uniform. And you just want to keep that in mind as you're considering this fee, as you pick and choose kind of who you want to provide special consideration to. That may become more and more a factor as we go through this.
Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.
I guess I'll just add a little bit to what Dave said. I completely agree. It was very much a policy choice by the board to pursue the consideration of a stormwater fee, partly because it did include anybody that was having impervious surface, and that was a policy decision. On the other hand, it's also a policy decision to alleviate the burden from those who are struggling. And so I don't see the incorporation of a hardship policy for organizations that are struggling and suffering hardship. I see that as being just part of an additional policy that I think this body here now, sitting here now, really wants to elevate. So I think that both of those things could potentially work together. The incorporation of nonprofits, but the acknowledgement that some of them struggle just like individuals, and that we can maybe accommodate for that. So I would be in favor of the inclusion of a hardship policy for nonprofits.
think
But
I
it would
wanna
have to
wait
be
and
just
hear-
a hardship policy, not all nonprofits.
I think I would
Steve.
want to wait and hear what Dave finds.
Yeah, agree. I agree. Pending what, shakes out. Steve.
I guess the only, as we talk about it, the place that I run into some problem with that is what do we say to businesses that are struggling to exist because of whatever reason their income is down, and whether it be due to COVID or bad business decisions or whatever, they're struggling and they may be out of business next year if they don't get an exemption from this. I think it's one of those things where the ag exemption, we have a rationale based on actual stormwater situation for that one. For a hardship exemption for residents, I think that fits into a structure that has existed in a lot of things, that you have an exemption below a certain income level. I think once we start moving into organizations and determining hardship, I think we're getting into something that's going to be really difficult to justify. Well, this organization, because it's a charity, is struggling and it's a hardship, but this organization, which is a business, is struggling, but we're not going to consider that as a hardship. And I guess as the discussion goes on, I'm leaning against expanding this. I have no problem with, looking a little further into the legality of it. I think that's the first question is, can we even do it without jeopardizing the whole structure that we have? And that, but I think I'm leaning against moving away from what we've already established, but. So.
I think I agree with that too, Steve, after listening to Dave's comments and thinking it through a little more.
I feel like maybe we should take a straw poll. I'm not sure.
Well, if there's consensus from the board, I can do a little bit more I could do a little deeper dive and see if we could, maybe resolve some of the concerns that were, articulated here tonight, and maybe be prepared. Then, because it's a resolution and it would be part of the hardship exemption policy that would apply to residential property owners. We can do this without having to make wholesale amendments to the draft ordinance. We could still kind of keep marching down that road. So I would, if the board's agreeable, I can do a little bit more do a little more research into what some of these concerns are and whether there's a way to navigate them.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Steve?
Yeah, so just wanted to clarify with Dave, for resolution, we could make a change or a decision on the first meeting in February and have no problem with advertising or anything, couldn't we?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I would especially like to know if I'm presuming you will also be talking to the solicitor and Steve's concern, which is the fairness question. If we are having a hardship policy for cash-strapped nonprofits, but not a hardship policy for cash-strapped businesses, and will that get us into legal issues and things like that? So that I think is a big question. I would like to know the answer to.
I think it is a big question. It's a fair question. I don't think we'll be able to get a good answer to it. To be very candid,
Yeah, I agree.
think, that is absolutely a concern. When you're disproportionately or disparately treating one class of property owners than another, it's always a concern that, members of the, adversely treated group are going to, lob some kind of challenge our way. And the way these programs are developing around the state, even though they've existed nationwide for decades or more, they're fairly new to Pennsylvania. Much of that is still being adjudicated, and I can certainly, consult with the solicitor and see if she has any, initial thoughts on it. I absolutely will do that. I just don't know that that the board is going to get the degree of clarity that you may be looking for in order to make, a decision, a sound decision, with confidence, knowing that you wouldn't be putting anything in jeopardy.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
Steve?
And I just had one other question that has occurred to me as we're discussing this. For our exemptions, do we have one resolution that covers the ag exemption plus the hardship exemptions?
We would have, what is proposed would be two separate.
Okay, that's what I wanted to be sure of.
One for
So if
agriculture.
one was challenged, it wouldn't affect the other.
Yeah, so, with the agriculture exemption as proposed, the mechanics of it are in the ordinance itself.
Right.
And that was done intentionally so that it was very narrowly focused and, based on the introduced bill that it was modeled after. But it would still be appropriate, as referenced in the ordinance, that a resolution be adopted to confirm that the board wants to apply that agricultural exemption. Hardship exemption, as is written, is a little bit more fluid. As I said, it doesn't pertain to a specific class of property owners. It doesn't say residential, business, et cetera. So, it allows for a little bit more flexibility, but we would absolutely you would be presented with two separate resolutions, one to cover the hardship, which, could encompass both residential property owners and nonprofits, if we can find a way to navigate some of the concerns we talked about tonight, and then a separate one for the agricultural exemption.
Okay, because those are totally different rationales for them. I just want to be sure there's separate resolutions. Okay.
Thanks, Steve. Anything else to discuss about the ordinance? Okay. Yes, we'll move on to, if everybody's okay to move on without a break. Okay. Continued discussion on Whitehall Road Regional Park. Dave, would you like to introduce this for us?
Sure, I can. So as the board will recall, this has been talked about at several board meetings, as well as in front of the COG General Forum. There's the most recent developments in the project to build Whitehall Road Regional Park is that bids were received back by the Center Region Parks and Recreation Department. The early indications are that some of the low bids, as few as one or perhaps several of the low bids in the contracts that were that were received may be disqualified. I'm not exactly sure why, but that information may not necessarily be shared at this point. So, there's cost containment concerns that continue to exist. Of course, shrouding this all is the issue of refinancing the loan and what the principle is that was authorized by the participating municipalities to spend on not just Whitehall Road Regional Parks development, but overall regional parks and how it pertains to the pools loan, et cetera, et cetera. So what I have, and that's a really Cliff's Notes version of that that discussion, and Ms. Nittany, feel free to add anything that I'm missing. But there's a number of items that are included in the agenda that are kind of carry forward from a previous conversation. And really what the board's being asked tonight is to provide any, concluding comments or direction to the park department and the COG as far as what the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors position is on the development of Phase 1 Whitehall Road Regional Park, as well as what to do with the proceeds from refinancing the loan if authorized.
Thanks, Dave. That's right. So there are a couple attachments in the agenda. One in particular are the questions that Ferguson Township has yet to respond to for COG and the Park Authority. I wanted to bring this back around because there have been some developments, and I thought maybe we could start by refreshing our memory on the questions that we had previously asked and got answers to. And then go on from there, have a discussion, and hopefully answer some of those questions, because I do believe that the COG conversation about the refinancing is going to be happening in the near future. So if nobody minds, I just wanted to briefly go over the questions, what we wondered about the first time or two we talked about this, just to get us back on track. So one thing we wanted to know were the penalties and costs the municipality if the loan was repaid and the project abandoned. And we did find out that we'd have to pay back the grant, the acquisition funds from DCNR, but that in terms of the loan, that we have enough money to repay the loan in full and we would not be making any more loan payments. Then we asked if the loan was refinanced and the additional funding was turned back to the park authority, what might something like that be used for? And in terms of the response, it was if the $300,000, that's the estimate, at least was the current estimate at that time, that might be gained in interest savings. If that were returned to the authority, those funds could be allotted to the site development, which is the most expensive piece of the park. So that was their response at that time, that it would be perhaps allocated to the site development. We were curious about priority use agreements and how they might be affected by the decisions that we would make. And we got a response that the Happy Valley Adventure Bureau had contributed some funds to the LED sports field lighting. I believe there's also a grant for that. And those funds are really dedicated to that site, to use the lighting at that particular site. We wondered about the guarantee of the Musser Gap Greenway. And I followed up with Sharima today, and she said that she'll be meeting next month with Penn State folks to talk about that. I asked her if they're ready to make an MOU agreement with us. And she said they'll discuss it next month, but she's not sure if they're ready for an MOU. We were curious what would be able to be built with the available funding and what would be built with the additional $2 million that is currently unfunded. That's a complicated question, but right now, as I understand it, the bathrooms are still currently not going to be built with the available funding, along with the irrigation. And right now it's slipping my mind, the third item that is in the unfunded list. And the 2 million, if that was funded, obviously we could do a lot more with that money, continue to build out the master plan. We asked if municipalities would support eliminating the fields from the park. Some of the fields to, invest that money into maybe partly a passive use park. And the response was really that this is the master plan and it's been in place for a long time and we're still working on building out this master plan. We inquired about the playground grant, and that money is also dedicated to Whitehall Road Regional Park. So if that playground isn't built there, those monies would need to be returned. So those were all the questions that we had asked previously. The questions that we will need to provide answers to are, if we want to refinance the loan, do we want to have the savings returned to the municipalities or invested in the park? And those savings are anticipated right now to be approximately $300,000. Do we want to contribute any additional funds to the park for maybe some of the unfunded portions? And lastly, are we interested in abandoning the park project? I think that was the fourth question. So those are the questions that we need to answer for COG. I will open it up for discussion. And I think, Steve, did you want to add anything in terms of finance, in terms of the loans?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I guess in terms of loan, the question will come before Finance Committee. which ties directly to this, is really the question of what do we do about refinancing? Because we need to determine whether we want to have Chris Gibbons start working with banks to come up with, the best deal. And so once we start doing that, we will incur some costs. So we have to decide, and it's going to have to be a COG decision. So the Finance Committee will make a recommendation. I think we'll probably have a special meeting early in February to discuss that. And I need to get feedback from the township for that. I would say in terms of closing down the loan and taking, returning the money to the municipalities, we could recommend that, but it would have to be a unanimous decision of the 5 municipalities in order to do it. Any decision concerning a loan has to be a unanimous decision. I can tell you that for certain that there will be municipalities who would not agree with that, in which case the money that exists now would go to the authority to use toward the master plan. So what I see as the real question is, do we want to refinance? Which I think it would not be a good idea not to refinance, because rates are so low right now that we can save a significant amount of money. The number was 300,000. If the rates are low enough, it might even be a bit more than that. So the real question is, and the way it's worded in these options is not clear what they're asking. So I'll try to summarize what the real question is do we want to borrow the same principal we owe right now at a lower rate and pay less in payments over the course of the loan? Or do we want to say, okay, we've committed to paying this much, so if we borrow an amount that would be the same payments, we would have more principal? So that's the real question. The option 1 and 2, it's not so much as put the money back in or give it back. It's a question of, do we borrow at the same principal at a lower rate and save money, or do we borrow a bigger principal, the same rate, pay the same amount of money, but have more money for the park? And what, for me, I need to have is just direction from us as to what we would recommend. Now, you got to keep in mind, like everything else related to the loan, if we can't come up with a unanimous decision at the COG level, the loan's just going to stay the way it is, which means we will be paying what we're committed to right now and half what we already have. So somewhere or other, we have to come up with agreement among the 5 municipalities, or things just stay the way they are. That's basically where we are. I guess I'll go in and toss in my my thought on it, which is my thought is that if we refinance at a higher principal and a lower rate, we're still paying the amount that we had previously committed to, but have more money for the parks. And that would be my recommendation, but it's really a board recommendation I'm looking for. So I'll stop there. So.
Thanks, Steve. It is an interesting situation in terms of the COG vote. I think it's interesting to consider that, but we should start from a position where we really think is the best route forward, and then work out at the COG General Forum who is or isn't in agreement with that. Is that how it would be worked out, Steve, or is it worked out in the finance? I mean, it has to be eventually worked out in.
The Finance Committee will make a recommendation. Specifically, we will make a recommendation to the Executive Committee, which will make a recommendation to the COG General Forum.
Okay.
Then it is up to the municipalities to decide whether we support that recommendation or not.
Gotcha. Okay, so thoughts on the refinancing whether we should basically keep the savings for Ferguson Township or put the savings back into the park in a real nutshell. And just to recap again, right now we think that savings would be about $300,000. And then just to add in a slight amount of complexity, but it's relevant to our decision making, is that it had been put forward that if the bids came in, I don't know what the phrasing is, under, like, you know, that there was going to be, that we were going to have savings if they could give us more park than we thought we could get for that money. We would also maybe then have that money to put together with this $300,000 to invest it into an amenity. But it appears at this point, and this is not firm yet, it appears, and I confirmed this in Parks Capital Committee, it appears that there is not going to be any additional dollars coming out of that, additional dollars, freed up dollars coming out of that bid process. So it does appear that the savings from the refinancing would be the only additional dollars to reinvest into the park.
One thing I just wanted to note is that 300,000 is a total for all municipalities.
Right.
So ours is roughly a fourth of that.
Right.
Yeah.
And will it require unanimous consent to take it back, or if some municipalities want to do something with it and the others want it back, would that work or not?
That's what I was curious about in terms of the process. So apparently each of the municipalities on the paper will give their opinion, and then that will go to, if I understood Steve, that will go to Finance Committee to make a recommendation to Executive Committee, and then Executive Committee will make a recommendation to General Forum. So that recommendation, like if they get, so there's 5 municipalities that participate in parks, if they get a 3-2 split, they're going to have to work out a recommendation based on that 3-2 split. So it's not necessarily going to be an easy job for them. And then, so if you're eventually the municipality that's in the General Forum and the recommendation turned out to be the opposite of what you wanted, then that's your opportunity to argue your point in General Forum.
Yeah. And then in the end, if the 5 municipalities can't agree on one process or the other, nothing changes. That's the
right.
Yeah.
No, so can't agree means it would be a majority vote in the General Forum or a unanimous vote in the General Forum?
Unanimous. So if we did not get a unanimous vote, I would assume that how it would go is if we didn't get a unanimous vote on the recommendation, which if the recommendation, for example, was to reinvest the money in the parks and we didn't get a unanimous vote, I would guess that somebody would put up another motion to still refinance it and to keep the savings, because it would just be cutting your nose off to spite your face to not go for the refinancing at all. So if a municipality really wanted that, to have that savings realized for their municipality, I don't think they're risking not being able to refinance by putting that forward. That's just my guess though. Steve, you have more experience than me. What do you think?
I would say you would think that's the way it would work.
Oh,
I'm
boy.
not going to say that's the way it would work.
Right. Yeah. So I'll say that I would, of course, be in favor of refinancing, because again, it seems to be silly to not realize that savings for some entity. So that I think we probably could all agree on. I feel like if that $300,000 was going to be used for the bathrooms, that would expand the ability for many other people to really comfortably use that park, that perhaps I would be in favor of that. But when I reread this document and it said it would be used for site development, I was very concerned about that because I already thought that all of site development was funded. So for me, that just actually gave me another question, like, why would we be using the savings for something that's already funded? I'm a little bit concerned about that.
So what exactly is site development? They like clear the ground or something, or what is?
That's right.
And that has not been done fully.
Well, my understanding was that that was the main primary concern to get that piece funded, because really nothing can happen until you get that base done. You can't put like a building on top of something that's not graded. And so my understanding is that was a main priority in their funding. Now, at some point in this conversation years ago, I think, before this board was sitting, the previous iteration of this board had requested that less of the park area be developed because they had not enough money to develop it properly. So we had suggested that they shrink the area that the site would be developed. I don't remember if that idea was really discussed, but it seemed like that was not going to be a consideration as the authority considered where they were going to allocate those funds. So I'll just take one moment right now to state that I still have a lot of issues with the fact that Ferguson Township, along with the other municipalities, took out a loan years and years ago for something like, I think, $8.9 million for Oak Hall Regional Park Phase 1 and Whitehall Road Regional Park Phase 1. And here we are years later, and the Phase 1 that we're getting is a mere shell of what was promised to us. And so I have great concerns about that, because we've heard that there's likely not going to be any additional funding for the so-called regional parks. We've also heard Harris Township very vocally, please could Oak Hall or could Hess Fields, please get the bathrooms, please get the bathrooms. And my fear is that this is going to be it for us. And the authority is so committed to building this expensive master plan that will be never realized. And so to me, it always seemed like a much better idea to make a master plan for a park that you can afford and then build it. So whenever I talk about this and the decision is, should we go without bathrooms or should we go without irrigation? I always think we should start a master planning process over again that acknowledges our constraints of funding and build what the people said they wanted in the surveys and not necessarily a tournament facility. So I sometimes have a hard time deciding on whether we should put $300,000 more into a park that it's really not going to get us any additional parkness. But you guys probably know this by now. I've probably said similar things many, many times. So my first choice would be to not do this park. But if we're not going to not do this park and revise a master plan and do something else, I would say that money, if we do put it back into the park, really should be used for an amenity like the bathrooms, because it serves every single person that goes to that park. But then I've been told, right, that the authority has purview over how that money is used, should we choose to put it back into the park. So I don't know if we could possibly state that we wanted, if we all agreed on that, that we wanted it to be used for amenity like that, as opposed to just giving them free rein.
I will say that I will make that recommendation if we, at the finance committee, that the finance committee include that recommendation, because I think building this park without a bathroom makes no sense to me, so. And I believe there will be other members of the finance committee that would agree. Now that, again, the ultimate decision goes to the authority, not to COG. So we can make a recommendation along with whatever we make as a recommendation on refinancing, but we can't really make a direction, so.
Unless we state that our vote, if, again, I'm not sure if others feel the same, but if we stated that our vote was predicated on that, like if they need a unanimous vote to have that funding invested back into the park, and they need it to be unanimous, and we'll say no unless it's more than just an acknowledged recommendation, but actually a commitment.
I will certainly present that as a discussion item at finance. I don't know where we'll end up with it, but that's if the board wants to do it that way.
Yeah, I don't know. What do others think about that?
Yeah.
Well, I'd be in favor of the refinancing. And, you know, like you said, if we can't decide where either the savings, the 300,000 or whatever it turns out to be, where they go, or if we were to increase the principal amount, we can't decide where that's going. So we could still have an incomplete project here. And that restroom building that is unfunded right now is even reduced from what it was. That was going to be the restroom building, pavilion, and concession stand, which I thought were all important to what they're trying to achieve there. To have, you know, I don't know what other kind of pavilion they have there in the plan, if there is one at the park area, but, you know, I think for what the park is supposed to be, I think you need all three. So to know that even now it's just the restroom building we're talking about, how that is not in the initial amount that's included in the shortfall. If you were looking at the agenda packet where it says 2020 remaining loan proceeds, and it goes through all the different funding parts, the restrooms, the maintenance storage building, and the irrigation are listed as unfunded priorities. And I don't know how, you know, I can see the maintenance storage building being considered an unfunded priority, and then irrigation, but how restrooms are included in that is just, I don't get it. So, you know, I would not agree to increase any amount of funding, knowing that we can't guarantee that this is going to end up as more than, you know, lighting at fields with a parking lot and no restroom. I don't know if that answers the question. I'd be in favor of the refinancing. You know, once we divide that 300,000 up, I'm not sure if it's, you know, I think it would mean more if we kept it in the park and said there's a condition that we need this to go to that one amenity, the restroom building. So that's where I would be on it at this point.
I'm at a similar space, and yeah, we should certainly refinance, and yeah, the money, you know, as long as it's used for a good purpose, like a restroom building or something, I'm fine. Maybe we should recommend that they name it the Laura Nittany Memorial Bathroom. Sorry.
I think somebody else's name is supposed to go in this park somewhere.
I wouldn't use memorial until that was
Oh, good point.
honorary, maybe.
Sorry. Yeah.
I agree. I also think that in some way that I agree with everything that you all have just said, but I wish we could somehow leverage having the, all accessible playground, like having that, you almost need the bathrooms there. To the challenge of having that, it just, I don't
Yeah, that,
understand.
I agree completely that
Yes.
having an accessible playground and no accessible restroom makes no sense whatsoever. And it just,
Yes. I sent out an email earlier. I sent it out late in the day, so I didn't expect a response, but I asked a question to the park agency. I asked, what were the criteria that were used in the beginning of the development of what this modified phase 1 would be to select the amenities that would be the essential amenities? Again, I haven't had time to get that answer, because I would have thought too that bathrooms would have been a primary, very primary thing. Okay, so would it be fair to say that in the document, to answer the questions, what we're saying is that we would be supportive of refinancing and investing back into the park if that money were used for bathrooms? Is that,
or worded as if we can get a commitment from the authority to put that money toward a restroom,
yeah.
put the savings there. Yeah.
I also think it's worth asking, because I know that they've got a grant or something and then some donations for the lights, but is lighting more of a priority than, what's the priority? The square fields or the rectangular fields or the lighting? Like, I don't, do you know,
Well, I
would
think
it be worth asking your donors if they would transfer that money into a bathroom as opposed to lights? I understand the grant's probably tied up, but.
It's coming from lighting contractors.
Oh.
Well,
So,
it's
Well,
also
there to indicate other donors as well.
Yeah, it's coming from Happy Valley Adventure Bureau as well.
That was also for the lighting, yeah.
And that money toward those lights, it is intended to have a tournament facility. So this is what their goal is, to have a tournament facility that hosts tournaments, that brings people in to sleep overnight in hotels, then pay the hotel tax, and then fund the Visitors Bureau. So the lights are important to that entity, but I did ask their executive director, do you feel like a tournament facility without bathrooms is really going to be the kind of tournament facility that you envision?
And just to reiterate, I think as with Hess, that's the one they're asking. I can't expect to ever come back and add on to this. So I think we need to insist at this point that this gets in there as if it's our one shot to get what we think this park absolutely needs.
Yes, I believe that that is an accurate statement. So in terms of what we're writing back, so we're saying yes to the refinancing with reinvestment, but only if it's committed to restrooms. And if not, then refinancing and we'll take the savings. Okay. All right. Whew, got those first two.
Finance.
Got those first two questions done. Okay, so then I think I could guess the answer to the third question, which is, does your municipality want to give additional funding to, okay, so I see Patty shaking no. Does anybody, okay, Percentage, I see a no. You guys know I'm a no. Yeah, no. Okay, so then the answer to that is no, we do not want to invest more money, additional funds. And then the last question, I think we don't really necessarily need to answer, but I mean, we probably don't want to, I'm imagining we don't all want to fold the project. I mean, I would say, yes, let's fold the project. If anybody else is interested in, okay, so.
I would say revisit the master plan, but I don't know what the options are for that. at
That's
this
not
point.
an option that's open to us. I mean, we can say
But
it, but it's an option. We can say it. That option's open, but it won't happen. I guess that's the,
I would value having us comment that though, even if we said, I mean, obviously they're looking for direct answers to their questions, but if we wanted to comment there that we would be interested in revisiting the master plan, I think that that would be helpful in terms of the Parks Capital Committee conversation. So. Does everybody feel okay with making that comment? Okay. Okay. All right. Great. I think we are through our Whitehall Road Regional Park discussion. Okay. Next, we'll move on to new business. And we have our consent agenda. We
I'm
have a
gonna
treasurer's
request that we take a
report.
quick break before that.
Oh, certainly. Of course we can. 5 minutes or 10?
5 is plenty.
Okay, 5-minute break, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Need to stand.
If Prasenjit is back, we can get started again. Okay, great. Let's get started. We'll move on to new business. First, we have our consent agenda, and we have a treasurer's report to accept. And so could I get a motion to accept the treasurer's report and to approve the consent agenda?
This is Patty. I move to accept the treasurer's report and the consent agenda.
Send it second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Moving on to a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, certifying provision of local match for state operating and capital financial assistance to the Center Area Transportation Authority for fiscal year 2021 to 2022.
Thank you. So provided with your agenda is a copy of the resolution that's been advertised for public hearing. It authorizes an operating fund contribution to the Center Area Transportation Authority for their fiscal year, which is July 1 through June 30th, in an amount totaling $123,786 and capital funding totaling an amount of $17,620. The contributions for the 2020 to 2021 fiscal year that we're currently in totaled $117,981 for operating and $17,619 for capital. So almost exactly the same for capital, but an increase about $5,000 in operating fund contributions. So typically the board will adopt by resolution of all the municipalities that contribute to certify its local match, which is then provided by CATA for their federal budget requirements, which require a certain local match to offset federal and state investments. Resolutions with your agenda. If you have any questions, I can answer them to the best of my ability. Otherwise, staff is recommending the board adopt the resolution.
Okay, could we start with a motion?
I'll move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution certifying provision of local match for state operating and capital financial assistance to the Center Area Transportation Authority for fiscal year 2021, 2022.
I'll second, Lisa.
Thank you. Do we have any conversation about this? Comments? Concerns? Okay.
I'll just add one comment, and that's that it's, it is unfortunate that we've had the reduced service in the township and we're seeing an increased cost. And I'll put on a future consent agenda to talk about this so that we can kind of look at the formulas they're using and different things. I think it's understandable right now, and the cost and the need to approve this at this time, given their funding cycle and the local match requirement. But I'd like us to get into a discussion about CATA and our relationship with them.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, this is a resolution, so it'll be a roll call vote. Dave?
I should note, if I may, that this is a public hearing.
I'm sorry. Let me take public comment on this.
I don't see any hands. Just wanted to put it down.
Okay.
Okay. This is presented as resolution 2021-4. Mr. Mitra,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Nittany,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next, consideration of a local regulations of personal delivery devices, or PDDs. Dave?
Yes, I'm going to ask Jenna Wargo to introduce this. We also have Trish Meek with the Center Region Planning Agency that I will bring on to speak. She's been doing some of the reconnaissance on this particular action item as it pertains to the region. Jenna, I don't know if you had anything you want to tee up with.
Just the agenda language that I've included. It's quite extensive. If the board would like me to read that, I can. I've tried to summarize it best to my ability. I'd like to utilize Trish, she's here, for any additional questions.
Sure. I'm Trish Meek, so I haven't met some of you in person yet. And I'm one of the transportation planners at Center Regional Planning. And as Dave has mentioned, I actually sat in on a statewide meeting at the beginning of December where this legislation or this act was actually discussed, and everyone around the table was very surprised by it. So it moved extremely quickly through the process to become a law in the state of Pennsylvania, and we're still catching up with exactly what it means. We've reviewed some of the policy information that's been provided, and as the agenda states, there will be a webinar on Wednesday. So we as staff will sit in on that. We'll ask questions as are appropriate, and we'll provide information back to the township. It's our understanding that PennDOT is actually the entity that provides the permit. So they permit these personal delivery devices. So when you think about them, they're all ground-based. So they're not drones. They don't fly. The policy document limits the number of devices, the size of devices, some of the constraints as to where they operate. But we still have a lot of questions as to where they will appear and exactly what that process will look like. So it's evolving. We don't anticipate that every municipality in Center County will get them, but probably some of the areas with higher densities will. And so State College Borough and Ferguson Township and College Township are probably areas that may be identified as operational areas. So as part of our role, we're reaching out to the municipalities, collecting questions. So if there's things you want to know and it's not addressed in the policy or the information that's been provided, we can be a conduit to try to get that information and relay your concerns back to PennDOT, because now is the time for us to tell them what we're concerned about. Now, the Mpo comments that were included in your agenda, I'll just clarify, those actually were sent to PennDOT already. And in the policy document, they actually addressed some of them. So we were very surprised and happy about that. One of the things that we were really concerned about was that these devices are considered pedestrians by law. So everywhere pedestrians can operate, they're permitted. So our shared use path system, so the Blue Course path along Blue Course Drive and the path that runs parallel to the golf courses, many of those were built with types of federal funds that don't allow motorized vehicles to operate on them. And we were really concerned about these devices operating and commingling with bikes and pedestrians in those areas. They've specifically in their policy now addressed this, that they're not permitted on those types of paths. So we have seen responsiveness by the state. I just wanted to put that out there to you, but they are new. It will be evolving, and it'll be an interesting situation when we see them apply and appear. But if you have specific questions, I can try to answer them. And if I don't have an answer, we can take those to PennDOT to try to get answers. But again, I apologize that this is such a rushed scenario, but really it just appeared out of nowhere. And we're just trying to react as quickly as we can to ensure that the region has the answers that they need.
Thank you, Trish.
Sure.
Questions about PDDs that we'd like to pass on? I thought that the document that the MPO staff put together was really well done. I mean, I couldn't really think of any other kinds of concerns. I guess just for me, just one distinction. Trish, you mentioned that they would not be allowed on shared use paths that were built with funds specifically prohibiting motorized vehicles, but they're allowed on other shared use paths, if I understand correctly. Is that true? Or
the way that at least the policy document reads right now, it's those facilities that were constructed with federal funds. So In some cases, we used federal transportation enhancements or transportation alternative program funds. And there are clauses, because those are they're federal highway dollars that we use to construct them. They're specifically prohibited there. But your point is very valid, that Ferguson Township has been exceptional in building shared use paths as part of developments. So in the case of the Stonebridge Haymarket Park or the Saybrook neighborhood or North Fox Point Drive, in those areas, the developers built those paths. So that is definitely a clarification that we can ask for, that, there are concerns about those that weren't built with federal funds, but also have the exact same characteristics. So we can pass that along.
Thank you. And then I just wonder about enforcement. If some are and some aren't allowed, it seems like, do we have to sign every single shared use path now for that, or?
Well, it's my understanding in reading at least the draft application that when the PDD operator comes forward with their permit application, they will identify the specific locations that they will operate. So they're only allowed to be in those locations. So it's tied back into what's permitted, and the municipality would have the opportunity to provide comments.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you. Any others?
Well, I have a question that doesn't necessarily need to be passed on since it's rhetorical. What the hell was the legislature thinking?
I cannot answer that question.
They were probably influenced by the giant thing that goes around the aisles and the giant.
And then
When I did
the robot that ran over my foot yesterday in the produce aisle.
Uh-oh.
I don't think we're ready for PDDs. My concerns, frankly, I mean, it's a valid point that, I think Mr. Miller rhetorically brings up, but I think it's got some, which is, I mean, and Trish, maybe this isn't so much a question as it is a general concern. I mean, we've seen these kinds of things materialize over the last several years in different formats. One was the distributed antenna systems, the small cell towers. We had segways and Lime scooters, and now we have these PDDs, and who knows what's next in the Internet of Things that may develop. And I wonder, from my perspective, I wonder if what the likelihood of preemption is of local regulations to begin with. These different initiatives tend to follow, at least in my experience, a common pattern, which is legislation's enacted before municipalities are given the opportunity to comment. We're given kind of a tacit opportunity to provide feedback, but it's sort of meaningless, although I'm encouraged to hear what you said before, Trish, that some of the feedback's been incorporated. And then there's yet another step of preemption that comes later, maybe at the federal level, so perhaps even the state wouldn't be involved, and that sort of negates any discussions of local regulations or supersedes any local ordinances, in any case. And then typically years go by and we don't see any of these applications or things come to fruition anyway. So maybe it's a non-issue, but, I just, I think that's, I echo Mr. Miller's rhetorical question, which is, what were they thinking? And do we even really have any say in the matter at this point?
It's a very complicated question and scenario. When you look at it, that it was developed by legislators. It's our understanding that the office that will review and issue the permits is the PennDOT Office of Transformational Technology. So they're new to us, and so we haven't really, MPOs and RPOs haven't really worked with them before. So it's a new territory for us as well as for them, but we're just trying to think of any scenarios or things that we can bring forward to them to help make this run smoothly. But I think it's a valid point. We don't know if they're coming or when they're coming. And when you read the policy document, it's clear that it doesn't apply on private property, because we had posed that question. What about business parks in Penn State University on their property? How will this be handled? So it's clear that it's in the public domain where this applies. So we'll keep you posted as we learn things.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I would like to get some clarification, and I think it's pretty clear actually, but if there's any consideration for allowing municipalities to consider lower speed limits at, places where it might be justified. Because, I mean, I've seen like a Geisinger in Danville, they have these delivery robots that move from floor to floor, get on the elevator with you, and they work well and they avoid people, but they move at 2 miles an hour.
Mhm.
But when you have a 500-pound vehicle operating on its own at 12 miles an hour, that's a really different thing. And I think there are situations where you really have to be concerned that something's going down the sidewalk at 12 miles an hour and no one really controlling it. I mean, there's a monitor, but it's not a control. So I think we do need to raise the question of, is there any possibility for municipalities to, consider that speed limit in relation to the actual conditions of the section of sidewalk or something like that?
I can definitely do it. I recorded the question and I'll submit it before the webinar on Wednesday.
Thanks.
So hopefully we'll have an answer quickly. Because they talk about hazardous conditions, right, where you may prohibit them, but it doesn't talk about what mechanisms you could use if you have concern about it operating in a particular, it's okay to operate, but perhaps you want to put other provisions in place. So we'll definitely get an answer to that.
Because I'm thinking of a sidewalk in front of a daycare center or something like that. You don't want that thing barreling down at 12 miles an hour. So
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Dave Modricker, you had your hand up?
Yeah, this is relatively new, and there was no discussion at all at the December Transportation Engineering Safety Conference, and there's always sessions on autonomous vehicles, but I see a definition for autonomous operations. But are there any phases, Trish, that were discussed where they'd be truly autonomous, or are they all remote operation in phase 1 and phase 2?
Yeah, the legislation is very clear about this, that there'll be 2 phases of operation. Phase 1 will be no less than 90 days and no more than 180 days. And in phase 1, it's 1 PDD operator per PDD. So it's a one-on-one relationship, and they must be within 30 feet of the device within a line of sight. So when they're first unleashed or utilized in the community in that phase 1, it is apparently it's very controlled. Now to move to phase 2, you have to document that there were no accidents in phase 1. So that is a good thing, right? That we know that the devices are operating. But in phase 2, then they can become an autonomously operated vehicle.
So no remote operation, Trish.
There is a clause in there that says that they have to be able to take over control, right, in phase 2, but they don't have to be within line of sight.
Well, there's a difference between line of sight and truly autonomous, and that's what I was saying.
I mean,
but I don't have to belabor it right now.
Yeah, and I can ask for clarification of that, because I think that's really how we get the answer, that sometimes the verbiage that's used within the policy document and definitely in the legislation, I think we can all agree with that, it's not typical people speak. It's not what we understand as citizens. So I'll just ask for clarification about that item.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Trish.
Sure. And thanks for having me. It's always great to engage, get to see everybody in action. So
I have a quick question.
Oh, sorry, Prasajit. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Don't worry.
No, she's here. I didn't kick her out. I think she's
I'm still here.
Okay. So yeah, my question was that the municipalities, if we think, my reading of that clause number, whatever A2 was, is that if we think that something would constitute a hazard or operating it somewhere would constitute a hazard, we need to consult with the authorized entities, so consult with them, and then we can if we decide that this does constitute a hazard, we can prohibit the operation of that vehicle in that sort of roadway or pedestrian area. Is that true?
That is exactly how the guidance reads, that, and the authorized entity is the operator of the PDD. So
Right.
it sounds like, at least at the statewide level meeting I was at where this was discussed, that it's in the best interest of the operator, so the PDD operator, to consult with and work with the municipality to ensure that this is seamless. Right? Because if they want to continue to operate and they want to have a good relationship, they need to do everything possible to coordinate with the municipality prior to the operation starting. So at least that was what some of the individuals that worked on the legislation were saying. And we have no reason to believe that's not true, that they'll want to make you as the municipality happy so that they can continue to use them. And, you know, when you think about this, you know, they seem so foreign and different, but in some areas where they're operating now, so really dense urban cores, when you think about where delivery trucks park and how they impact traffic patterns, and they take away parking spaces from customers, if they could deploy a truck in a location that's remote to that core, right? Deploy their little group of PDDs to deliver packages. They're not taking up a space in a downtown area, putting on their four-way flashers, delivering a package and then moving 50 feet down and reparking, right? So there's definitely positives for their deployment and their use, and that's likely where they'll be directed, at least is what our assumptions are at this point. But yes, they are supposed to work with the municipality to make this seamless.
Yeah, so a quick follow-up. So you said that they cannot come into private property. So effectively they could perhaps go on the sidewalk in front of my house, but they cannot go on my driveway. So they would have to maybe drop things beside my mailbox or somewhere without getting onto my driveway. Is that correct?
Says, the way the policy reads is it doesn't apply to private property, so they could operate. So their operation on Penn State University would be outside of the permitting under the municipality and PennDOT, or in a business park. So when I've watched a couple videos with this, and the Amazon Scout is the one that if you Googled that, you would see it. And they're actually quite cute. You know, they're just these little boxes and they roll up to the house and the lid pops open and somebody takes a package out of it. The realm of the application is whatever is in the public realm. So on the sidewalks and on the roadways, those are public facilities. When they're saying it doesn't apply to private, I think they're thinking of large land holdings like universities, because technically in this case, Penn State University is a private holdings as far as property. And so there, or in business parks where they're not municipal streets or sidewalks, this policy would not apply.
And so presumably Amazon or whoever is using it, if it's going to come to my house, when I place the order, they'll possibly get the permission or something.
Yeah, I think they'll come up, they can probably, I'm thinking they just utilize your sidewalk and you come out of your house, but I'm not sure what the protocol is. And yes, UPS is using them, FedEx is using them, Amazon, they're using them. They're operating in, I believe, 20 states already.
Sure. Thanks.
Any more questions? Okay, great. Thanks so much, Trish.
Thanks so much. Everybody have a great evening.
Okay, you too. Thanks.
You too. Thanks.
All right, next up, our staff and committee reports. We've got our COG committee reports first, and we've got all of our committee reports this meeting because we've done our reorganization. We'll start with Transportation and Land Use Committee. Lisa?
Sure, thank you. Yes, we had our reorganization meeting, and Teresa Lafer is chair this year again, and Frank Harden is vice chair. Did all of the housekeeping items of dates and etiquette and articles of agreement, went through all of that. The big work item was the realignment of the committees. So talking about merging and reassessing kind of how our committees are functioning. So that made our potential TLU committee activities a little bit off. So we looked at those. Somebody did point out that we probably had 10, 15 items, and a lot were just receive report, receive report, receive report. So that was kind of funny. I think with the expanded responsibilities, we'll be receiving more reports. So I could turn into some work. So anyways, just to kind of give you all some information about what the reorganization of the committees looks like. And I don't know what has been discussed in the other committees. I did attend Public Services and Environmental this week because that one is really aligned with TLU and what Jim May and CRPA are looking at for that reorganization. So I think public safety is kind of on its own and won't be affected too much. I think it's primarily TLU and Public Services and Environmental. That's what I'm gathering from these discussions. So if somebody is getting a different impression, I'd love to hear that, but that's the impression I'm getting. That so anyways, we went through this. CRPA is really looking at where responsibilities are overlapping, so we can cut down on that. With TLU, I'll start with, we went through what Public Services and Environmental does and what TLU does. 2 out of the 4 PS&E responsibilities are being shifted to the Climate Committee. So that's leaving them with 2 of their 4 responsibilities. With TLU, it's adding to that. So TLU currently gets reports from CCMPO. We provide input to CATA on an annual basis about proposed changes in service. As an aside, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. If we could bring CATA in to hear about proposed changes in service and the funding mechanism. So not really changing our relationship with them, but maybe expanding it and reworking it in different ways. So, you know, like CATA Go and things like that. So that kind of wanted to clarify that. We went through draft recommendations for TLU. So TLU would change into land use transportation and infrastructure, or LUTI. We're working on that acronym, and would take over getting those reports from Sewer Authority, Water Authority, and really merge that land use transportation infrastructure oversight and discussion. So I think it fits really well. I think with adding the Climate Committee and you know, taking out that environmental side from PS&E, I think it makes a lot of sense. So besides adding those 2 items, sewer and water, they also discussed adding to the LUTI committee discussions around stormwater. So maybe consultations with the MS4 group. You know, it's something everybody's talking about. So, you know, it's, anyways, it's a topic of conversation. Also adding affordable housing. One comment I made about that was the draft recommendation for a work task was to have the LUTI committee provide a forum to discuss regional affordable housing and develop an approach, then provide oversight to regional affordable housing issues and programs. The comment I made was that when we previously at TLU had talked about incorporating affordable housing into the discussions. We hadn't talked about oversight of any programs or developing any programs. So I wanted to dial it back from that and make that space at TLU or LUDI an opportunity for sharing information, for education, and we're not really producing anything here so much. So getting a really effective way for the members to bring the information they're gathering on the strategies being used back to their own boards and councils, so that they're all aware of what services are being offered, what different initiatives are being tried, and making TLU kind of an opportunity for that, as opposed to developing some other program or another department that's going to be handled in there. So I wanted to make sure that was the direction of the board. That was my suggestion there. So if anybody has any input they would want me to convey on that, or a different opinion, let me know. That was, kind of what I thought you all would say, but I wanted to bounce it back off of you and see, we have our own program here that we're working on developing, and, the borough obviously has one. So yeah. So that, and then the other thing I thought about suggesting next time is looking more at safety, particular safety issues that we all have that we're trying to focus on. So that was about it. It was a big meeting, and it was wrapping up or moving forward some of the things we had talked about in December. So yeah, I was interested, in any feedback that you guys have that you'd want me to bring back to the meeting next month. I'm sure that's going to be the bulk of what we talk about again. So
Thanks a lot, Lisa. And I have some feedback, but do others have any feedback for Lisa? Questions? Well, I'll just say that I really appreciate your approach on the affordable housing topic. I kind of reacted with some concern when I saw stormwater and affordable housing under a COG committee, because really that's something that's handled at the municipal level, and we sometimes just duplicate, and then a lot of staff time is taken up, and then maybe things like oversight at the COG level are happening for municipal programs. And so I just appreciate, Lisa, your changing of that affordable housing focus to be more of a sharing of information than an oversight of municipal programs. So.
Thanks. And that was one other comment I had made was when we receive all the reports that we receive in the committee, often one of the tasks that goes along with that is make recommendations. So I wanted to have staff and the committee really nail down what they mean by that. There's a lot of work on model ordinances that, we wouldn't necessarily use, or the borough or college. So it's, I want staff time to be used effectively over there. And we know that they're often, spread thin. So I think really honing in on what's useful to the municipalities is helpful to them. So hopefully this year we can kind of, as we reorganize these committees too, just to kind of help them learn about what is helpful for the municipalities to get out of their efforts. So
absolutely. And then we'll move on to public safety. I'm sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
I know somebody seems to have a hand up in the attendees.
Yes, I see that, Mr. Grau.
Bring him on.
Must be a mistake. I must have hit a wrong button. I'm just watching. Sorry about that.
No problem.
No, I'm out of here.
Thanks. Okay, so now we'll move on to public safety. I attended that meeting. I was elected chair, and Paul Takak of College Township was elected vice chair. A lot of reorganizational items. We also had a little bit of a conversation about what is the purview of the COG versus the purview of a municipality. And so there was some interest in discussing policing in the COG committee. And so the committee did end up with a kind of a majority consensus to add, not discussing policing per se, but being open to organizations that wanted to present information about various community concerns or that kind of thing. So I think that I really focused a lot on what is in the purview of COG, and maybe if there are regional issues of interest that we all agree are of interest, but they're not in COG purview, perhaps we could pursue those in other ways. We have, things like the initiative with the discrimination ordinance that's done at a regional level, but not necessarily through COG. As Lisa mentioned, when we were talking about this, that, the CVICC has hosted affordable housing kinds of programs. So COG is not the only venue for regional discussions of interest. And so in our public safety committee, we did talk a little bit about, what is our purview and what is not our purview. So I think that that'll be kind of like a common topic, hopefully through the restructuring. So we can really get a handle on where in our local government structure topics belong or have jurisdiction. Any questions in terms of public safety? Oh, we'll hear more this year from Steve Bear about our fire protection study. So that's going to be one of our main topics, is just unpacking the results from that in terms of our content. Okay. We can move on to Climate Action and Sustainability Committee, and that is Sanjit.
So the Climate Action and Sustainability Committee, it met, you have the agenda. I think Betsy was elected chair and Carla the vice chair. And pretty much it was an organizational meeting trying to figure out what we are going to do. Pam Adams talked about the issues and potential topics. There was a presentation made by Peter Buck on the RGGI Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and everyone was supportive, and people were asked to submit comments that would be sent, I guess, to the Pennsylvania board, and so on. And other than that, it was just regular stuff that's there in the agenda. So it was a short meeting, and people discussed about what should we be discussing in the follow-on meetings, and when we should be discussing and things like that. So that was, that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Questions? Okay. Human Resources Committee, Patty?
Yes, it was much like Presenjit's meeting. It was short and sweet, pretty much what was in the agenda that was provided. Just our task for the year. Bob Strauss is the chair and I'm the vice chair. The only thing that we really had a motion on was to forward to the executive committee about the negative leave policy, negative leave accrual policy. It's basically in response to the pandemic and people basically running out of leave time based on COVID, whether it's for themselves or caring for somebody in their family that had COVID kind of thing. I'll also go on to facilities, which didn't get listed there, but again, that was another quick reorganizational meeting. Just there was no change in leadership there, it just stayed the same. And we met the new facilities coordinator, and he's basically going to be doing an assessment to figure out what is what. They still continue working on the COG ownership issue with the executive director from COG and the local municipality managers. And work is continuing on the Millbrook Marsh Boardwalk, looking into environmental issues and various materials that are going to be used. And that's about it.
Thank you, Patty. Next is the Finance Committee. Steve? Oh, congratulations, Patty, on vice chairship. Sorry, Steve?
Yeah, we Matt and Evan will be chair, and Rich Frank will be vice chair, same as last year. A large topic of discussion was the loan, and we will probably have a special meeting to make a recommendation on that. That's for the Parks loan. We got an update on the SCLO Library and Library Foundation, sort of the relationship between those two entities financially, you know, what the responsibilities are for each entity, and have some questions that are going to be resolved on how that all works together. So that'll be a continuing discussion. Also, we saw some possible changes to the COG budget document that may simplify things, because it is a very complex 400 or 500 page document, and it has a lot of information. They're looking at ways to sort of streamline it. So those were the main things we discussed. Our committee priorities, we sort of did what we do a lot of times and sent it on to executive to tell us what they want. So you'll see those. So. And that was pretty much it for the Finance Committee.
Great, thank you, Steve. Yeah, thanks. And next is the Joint Park Capital Committee and the Park Authority meeting. Also reorganizational. I was elected chair. Eric Bernier was elected vice chair. In addition to our reorganizational items, we discussed Whitehall Road Regional Park, which you've heard about that already in our discussion earlier tonight. And we had a Park and Recreation Regional Comprehensive Plan update. In that discussion, we talked a little bit about governance and some of the existing confusion between the COG parks and the Park Authority, and the authority that COG has over the authority. We also increased our meetings from quarterly to every other month. I'm remembering that now because part of the reason is we will be discussing, as an elected official body, the governance. So we'll be able to discuss that jointly with the Park Authority, which I thought that will be beneficial. So as we move forward, talking about governance of parks, both of those entities will be there and be able to discuss it. In terms of Millbrook Marsh, we got an update on the repair of the boardwalk. You'll hear more about what was recommended in terms of that. They're in the process of discussing what materials would be best in terms of the repair, but they have really determined the footprint that would be best, and it does include actually an additional segment that makes, I believe, an internal loop that's connected with one of their important buildings. So we'll hear more about that. And that is about it for that meeting. Any questions? Lisa?
Laura, I was just going to ask if there is any estimation on timing for Millbrook Marsh repairs, if they expect anything to move this year or?
It's stated here that the current grant funding will roll into 2021. And that the project timeline was extended at the end of 2020 through December 31st, 2021. So as best I can tell, they do expect movement in this year on that, but I'll confirm that.
Okay, just curious. Thanks.
Yep. Any other? Okay. And next we have Public Services and Environmental Committee.
Yeah, so I messed up the dates and the times, and I didn't attend this one, but luckily I think Lisa did. But I did follow up, and I have some sort of comments. So as she mentioned, everything related to energy conservation, the environment, recycling, and policy and so on. So that has been moved to the CAS. And then what is left is essentially operation of sewer, water, stormwater, and the infrastructure. And even there are things I think that are going to be consulted with the Public Safety Committee, and some things moved to some other committees. So I don't know what, it'll be a shell of the original committee is my thinking, but I'll follow up more and figure things out. But maybe Lisa, if you remember what went on, you can comment on that. And yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say they had encouraged TLU to attend that one, knowing that they were going to be going over the priorities. So I sat in on that. So I guess that worked out. I'll just say the couple of things that they talked about adding to public services were natural gas, Penn State utilities, and then another one that would not apply only to this one, but was to incorporate equity and an observance of how any decision that any of these COG committees makes or recommends and decisions we make in our municipalities affects equity across the board with all different demographics and has a different effect on different groups. So they didn't delve into that. It was just a topic thrown out there to look into further and maybe to add to the mission statement. And then Prasenjit, the one question I kind of left with was I wasn't sure if the committees are really merging or if the folks, so if everyone on PS&E will then be joining the new TLU committee, or if they will still have a PS&E committee. So I wasn't really clear on where that was left. Because like you said, they're limited discussions over there. And it seems like a lot of those people are also on the climate committee, because I know you are, I think, and Betsy, I think, is on both. So I'm just curious to see how that's all gonna play out. I'm not 100% clear on it.
Yeah, Betsy and Carla are on both, I think.
Yeah.
But my understanding, at least, I'm taking some notes. I'll follow up on that. But my understanding is they will continue as separate committees, but maybe people are trying to figure out, and that's why maybe the equity thing is they're trying to add new work to make them relevant. But I'll find out what the plan is. But to the extent I know, they will continue as separate committees, at least in the near term.
And there is a joint meeting planned for February 4th at 12:15. So a joint PSNE and TLU
Yeah.
committee meeting. So
So
the
maybe that's when things will be decided, and for now, it's, yeah.
Yeah. I think the idea is to get this moving along so we don't get too far into the year without working on our, the real priorities. So, yeah.
I agree. There is some confusion about the eventual goal. I don't want to add any misinformation, but my understanding is it was the eventual goal was to merge the committees and have one less, which I'm kind of hoping that's the case. So we just kind of keep our structure tight and not get a lot of, I don't know, bloat in the structure.
Thanks for the insider information.
I'm not, it might be misinformation, so don't quote me, I'm not sure. So we don't have any other committee reports tonight, so we'll move on to staff reports.
Thank you. My report is in your packet. Just a couple items to touch on. Ferguson Township was asked to lead a pilot project in conjunction with the Pennsylvania Municipal League, the Nature Conservancy, and Sustainable Pittsburgh. We've been asked to host a community resilience building workshop. There's a little bit of material that's provided with my agenda. We still have yet to settle on a tentative date, and any additional details. As those become available, I'll share out with the board and with the public. But it's pretty exciting. It'll be, of course, virtual. Centrise has taken the lead on kind of coordinating some of that initiative. And Centrise, did I miss anything on that? Anything you wanted to add?
Nope, not at this time. Right now, we're just establishing a core team to work on scheduling the date for the upcoming workshop. And at that time, we'll have further details and direction.
Thank you very much. So more to come on that. Had a meeting with the screening committee for the SCLO library director vacancy that's forthcoming. We have our initial candidate interviews scheduled for this week. I believe those are on Thursday afternoon. So again, more information will come out of that as it becomes available. But our task as a screening committee is to submit recommendations to the selection committee, which Ms. Nittany sits on behalf of Ferguson Township. And there is some information on the Center County Hazard Mitigation Plan. There's a webinar that was hosted on January 7th that I attended. I put a link in my report in case you're interested in learning more about that. Still working on the transition from Lee Green and Ryder to Babs Callan, or Joe Green to Betsy Dupuy as the township solicitor. Working with Babs Callan on an engagement letter that is, going to mirror the retainer language and some of the discussion points that were had earlier on in the process. I briefed her on the various legal issues in which the township is involved. And so she's at least at a high level kind of familiar with all the things that are coming her way. I owe her a memo that goes into a little more detail describing each of those issues that I am working on as time permits. And then just lastly, had a meeting with the Climate Action Committee on January 11th. I plan to have a report scheduled, delivered by Brandy Robinson, who chairs that group. Ideally, it'll be ready for February 16th, the second meeting in February. It's to update the board on the progress made toward developing the greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategy. A lot of this conversation locally has become commingled with some of the regional initiatives. So I presume that there will be some updates provided on that. But of course, the committee is still remaining focused on the task at hand, which is the local greenhouse gas emissions inventory and reduction strategy for Ferguson Township. That's all I have to report on, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Questions for Dave? Okay, let's move on to Mr. Modricker's report, Public Works.
Sure, I can provide a verbal report. Winter operations continue. When not involved in winter operations, we have sign work, some building maintenance, some equipment maintenance that we've been performing. We did complete the dig out for some playground equipment at Fairbrook Park, and we did get through or prepare our annual work program. So all the senior staff reviewed our upcoming work for 2021. Pipelining continues in Chestnut Ridge. Staff is working on
Bless you.
21 projects. I will have those listed for you in my next written report to the board. The new building substantial completion is still on for the first week in February. A lot of work going on right now, very busy inside the building. We should be moving furnitures, computers, phones, IT. Second week in February with the idea of occupying mid to late February. In-ground lifts have been installed. The reclaimed wood that we salvaged from some trees that we had removed locally and then had them sawed at Ag Progress Days at their portable mill and then planed at a local planer have been installed. There's a couple accent walls and some wainscoting that's going in. So I think it kind of had a real nice touch with some local materials. The work continues, within budget. Tree Commission meets January 25th. They did not meet tonight in recognition of, they changed it to the Martin Luther King holiday. I believe that's all I had to report verbally.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions for Dave? Great. Next, we'll go to you, Jenna, with the Planning and Zoning Director's report.
Thank you. My report's included in the agenda packet. Planning Commission met January 11th. They reviewed the Tree Preservation Ordinance and the Personal Delivery Devices Act. They'll be meeting on 25th to again review the Tree Preservation Ordinance as well as the 3 land development subdivision plans at the bottom of those bullet points, the subdivision, the Wasson/Ash Avenue. And we believe that the West College Student Housing Land Development Plan will be ready for that meeting. So it will be a big one. Otherwise, we've just been working on Tree Preservation Ordinance, getting all those comments addressed, and yeah, keep them busy.
Thanks, Jenna. Questions for Jenna? I have one. Do others have any? Okay. Jenna, I'm not familiar with the Exempt subdivision plan, and I don't have Webbia up. So where is that located, that parcel?
Yeah, it's at the corner of Blue Course and College. So it's catty corner to Waffle Shop. Essentially, they are subdividing off the portion of the parcel that has all the stormwater on there. So if you're driving on Blue Course heading towards West College, there's like a cutout for a roadway that leads to nowhere. That's essentially where the subdivision is. And to the right is the stormwater, and then to the left is potential land development. We haven't really discussed what they plan to do with it.
Okay, thanks. I'm interested in that. Maybe I'll follow up after the meeting with you. Thank you. Okay, and next we have the Chief of Police.
Wrapping it up tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you. The Police Department's report for December and the year 2020 is included in the board's packet. Compared to 2019 overall, our calls for service were down in 2020. Our serious crimes were down, our less serious crimes were relatively the same, and our non-criminal calls activities were lower too. Some notable activities for the month: the first significant snowfall, we had 5 non-injury crashes and 25 stuck or disabled vehicles that we dealt with. We had a few calls involving some roommates physically fighting with each other. We investigated 2 fraudulent gaming tickets that were passed at a local convenience store. We've been able to identify at least one of the suspects in the case, so that's good news. We continue to have issues, or continue to see victims of gift card and iTunes scams. The scams involve a variety of tactics and scenarios, but they all kind of, direct the victim to pay their bills, fines, or penalties using gift cards or iTunes cards. My suggestion with that is anytime someone asks you to pay with a gift card or iTunes card, be very suspicious of that. For making the transaction, research the purported entity, verify who they claim to be, check with family, friends, and even contact us, for some advice on that too. For years now, we've been submitting victim and arrest demographics to the state on a monthly basis. Recently, the state revised the report that we submit, and it's more reader friendly. So I've included the arrest demographics report with my monthly report, and it will be part of my report moving forward. And that concludes my report. If anybody has any questions, I'll answer.
Any questions for the chief?
Just have one.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Patty?
Yeah. Chief, have you guys started to get vaccinated yet, or have you gotten any word about that?
Nope, we're still in 1A right now. The only officers that I just got recently notified, the only officers that are eligible are ones that have EMT certifications or more advanced first aid training. That includes 3 of our officers. The rest of us, we haven't heard anything yet.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
For Sanjit.
Yeah, so Chief, I was wondering if it makes sense to do a education campaign about essentially these cyber crimes in maybe our township's newsletter or some other ways to, proactively educate people about these things, or give them reminders from time to time, or is it just small enough that it's not worth doing?
No, we have included it in both our newsletters and the e-newsletters. We don't do it every month, so we don't get that, the reader boredom where they see it, just got and pass it aside. So we do some of the education. We've done, speaking engagements at local churches to, try to help educate people a little bit. We even have a little bit of information on our website. So it's definitely something that's out there, and trying to find a better way to educate is something we're trying to find.
And is it targeted to a particular demographic, or is it just across the board?
It's across the board. I mean, we've had international students, we've had elderly victims, we've had young victims who, were told that they had a warrant for their arrest, and to pay that fine, they needed to pay it off in gift cards or iTunes cards.
Okay. Sorry.
No, I mean, it just seems so weird. I mean, that's what, for me, whenever I think of the gift card, being involved in law enforcement, when somebody calls and says, hey, I'm a police officer, I want you to pay me in gift cards. Yeah. I don't know, something just seems very wrong with that. And that should be starting that, as I like to say, the spidey sense going up there that you sense something's wrong.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll move on to communications to the board. Okay, Lisa?
Yeah, I'll just add, I've continued to receive a lot of emails and phone calls about stormwater. And then just to say what Sanjit had just suggested of that kind of information being in the newsletter, if we could maybe put something on Facebook, to people who don't read the newsletter, just some kind of informational thing. I hadn't heard about this iTunes gift card, like that specific issue. So maybe it's worth putting out somewhere else too.
Yeah, I mean, I had asked for the demographics, not to be ageist, but I was thinking that if we could do, if it is targeted to people, elderly then we could do some Zoom sessions for them and in the nursing homes or other places where we can reach a bunch of people together, perhaps. But if it's across the board, then I don't know how to, we can put up some sort of a webinar and see who comes in, but I don't think people will pay attention until they are in a hole, and that's the problem. Yeah.
One of the other places we did some education too was through Penn State. When we were having some of their students that were targeted, we notified Penn State. And it's student affairs. I can't remember which department it was, but we notified them to try to get the message out to students so they weren't victimized.
Chief does talk about it at our HOA forums in the spring and the fall, because I've heard it quite often. And it still surprises me, but yeah, it happens.
When we had, I mean, it's even a topic at Coffee and Conversation too. I hit on it there as well. Sometimes I feel like a broken record when I discuss this.
It's really hard to reach all the people that need to be reached. Just while we're throwing out there resources to do that, just I'll add in the Nextdoor app. I know there's a state police officer on ours and puts out some information on occasion. So I don't know if the township's ever considered that, but that information spreads like wildfire. So, okay, passing communications to the board. If there's nothing else to add there, we're on to calendar items. Okay. Dave, if you said something, I did not hear you.
No, I just said I don't have anything for calendar items.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, well, here we are at adjournment. I'll take a motion. Okay, good night.
Night.
Good night.